CrumbleBob's back, my friends. Today I've got a great lineup of family drama, straight from the depths of our favorite Reddit. But before we jump in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It really means a lot to me. As always, get comfy, grab your favorite snacks, and let's dive headfirst into the absurd world of family problems. Let's go. My husband Jake and I have been together for about 6 years now, married for 3. His father, Robert, has never truly liked me much. I think part of it is because I'm not the kind of girl he pictured for his son. Jake comes from a rather traditional family where the women are all very quiet and submissive types. His mother hardly speaks up about anything and simply goes along with whatever Robert says. His sister is the same way with her husband. Then there's me. I work, I'm quite outgoing, I have opinions on things, and I don't simply nod along when someone says something I disagree with. Robert has made remarks over the years about how I'm too independent or too career-focused. When Jake and I got engaged, Robert actually asked Jake privately if he was certain about marrying someone who might not want to be a proper wife and mother. Jake told me about it later, and we both thought it was absurd, but it should have been a bigger red flag. The thing is, Robert isn't openly hostile or anything. He's more passive-aggressive. He'll make small comments that sound almost innocent, but have this edge to them. Like when I got promoted at work last year, he said something about how it was good, that some women could have it all these days, but he hoped I wouldn't get too caught up in my career to remember what truly mattered. Whenever I'd cook dinner for family gatherings, he'd always find something to criticize. The seasoning was off, or I hadn't made enough sides, or why didn't I make his favorite dish instead? Jake always defended me, which I valued, but he also had this habit of trying to smooth things over rather than directly confronting his father. He'd make excuses like his father was just old-fashioned or didn't mean anything by his remarks. I understand that it's hard to deal with family matters, but sometimes I felt like Jake was more concerned about keeping the peace than fully supporting me. Things became worse when we began trying to have children. We tried for about 1.5 years before I became pregnant with our daughter Emma. During that period, Robert made several remarks about how, perhaps, if I wasn't so stressed about work, I'd have an easier time getting pregnant. He also suggested I should leave my job and concentrate on being a wife, because that's what worked for his generation. I mostly just disregarded him, but it was frustrating. Then when I finally did become pregnant, Robert's attitude shifted in this strange way. He became almost obsessively interested in the pregnancy. He'd ask very personal questions about my doctor appointments, when exactly I conceived, whether I was taking proper care of myself. At first I thought perhaps he was just excited about becoming a grandfather, but something about it felt wrong. He'd make these pointed remarks about how the baby better resembled Jake when it was born, or how genetics were such a funny thing. The remarks grew more frequent as my pregnancy advanced. He'd utter things like genetics don't lie, or how he was eager to see which family traits the baby inherited. Sometimes he'd look at me with this suspicious gaze that made me truly uneasy. Jake noticed it too, but kept insisting his father was just excited and perhaps a little nervous about being a grandfather for the first time. I should mention that during my pregnancy I had to travel for work a few times. Nothing major, just overnight journeys to nearby cities for client meetings. Robert always appeared very interested in these trips. He'd inquire exactly where I was going, who I was meeting with, where I was staying. Again, Jake said his father was probably just worried about me traveling while pregnant, but it felt like more than that. Emma was born 8 months ago, and she's absolutely perfect. She has Jake's dark hair and nose, but she got my lighter eye color and perhaps my face shape. To me, she looks like a perfect mix of both of us, which is exactly what you'd expect. But from the moment Emma was born, Robert was strange about her appearance. He kept making remarks about how babies change so much in their first year, or how you truly can't tell who they resemble when they're so young. The first few months after Emma was born were quite normal, family-wise. Robert would come over to visit, bring gifts, hold the baby, but I observed him always examining her face very intensely, as if he were searching for something specific. He'd make remarks about her eyes or her facial characteristics that seemed pointed somehow. Jake and I were both exhausted new parents, so we didn't ponder too much about his strange behavior at first. We were simply trying to survive those initial months with a newborn, but looking back, there were certainly indications that something was amiss with Robert's demeanor. Around 4 months ago, Robert began offering to babysit Emma more frequently. Initially, we were grateful because we were both so tired and could use the assistance. He'd offer to care for her for a few hours while we ran errands or took naps. He appeared to genuinely enjoy spending time with her, and she was comfortable with him, so we saw no reason to decline. But then I began noticing strange things. A few times when we returned home from errands, Emma would be wearing different clothes than when we departed. When I questioned Robert about it, he'd say she had a diaper blowout or spit up on her attire, which seemed reasonable enough. But it occurred quite frequently, more than it ever happened when she was with us. There was also this one instance about 3 months ago when I arrived home early from getting groceries, and Robert seemed truly startled to see me. He was in the kitchen with Emma, and there was this moment where he looked almost guilty about something, though I couldn't discern what. When I inquired if everything was all right, he simply said he was attempting to get her to take a bottle, and she was being fussy. Around the same time, I began to notice that some of Emma's belongings were in different spots after Robert babysat. For instance, her hairbrush would be moved from the nursery to the living room, or her blanket would be folded differently from how I'd left it. These were minor things that could easily be explained, but once I started paying closer attention, it seemed to occur every single time. Jake thought I was being paranoid when I brought these things up with him. He suggested his dad was likely just tidying up or didn't recall exactly where things belonged, which was fair enough, I suppose. I began to wonder if I was just being overly suspicious, because I already had issues concerning Robert. But then came the questions. Robert began asking very specific things about Emma's development and health. These weren't normal grandparent inquiries, but odd, detailed questions about her medical records, whether she'd had any blood tests, and what her pediatrician had said about her growth patterns. When I asked why he wanted to know, he'd respond that he was just curious, or that he wanted to make sure she was healthy. What truly began to bother me was how he'd sometimes make remarks about Emma's paternity in what felt like a joking way, but wasn't genuinely funny. He would say things like, "She's definitely a mystery baby," or "I wonder who she truly takes after." On one occasion, he even said something about how modern technology could answer so many questions about babies these days. When Jake inquired what he meant, Robert simply laughed it off and stated he was just thinking aloud. I attempted to discuss with Jake how his dad's conduct was making me uneasy, but Jake continued to defend him. He mentioned Robert was simply adjusting to being a grandfather and perhaps didn't know how to properly express his excitement. Jake also noted that Robert had never gained much experience with babies, as Jake and his sister were adults by the time Robert's friends began having grandchildren. In retrospect, I should have trusted my instincts more. However, I was a new mom, I was fatigued, and a part of me questioned if I was being oversensitive due to the history between Robert and me. I didn't wish to create issues within Jake's family over what might merely be misunderstandings. The occurrence that made me finally post took place 2 weeks ago. Jake was away on business, and I was home alone with Emma. I'd been feeling truly overwhelmed and utterly exhausted, so when Robert offered to look after Emma for the afternoon so I could rest, I agreed. I was planning simply to take a nap and perhaps do some cleaning while she was with him. Robert arrived around noon, and I handed Emma over to him. She'd just eaten lunch and was in a pleasant mood. I informed him I'd likely just be upstairs resting and to call if he required anything. He stated they'd be fine and that I should get some sleep. I went upstairs and ultimately fell into a deep sleep, which I truly needed. When I awoke, it was nearly 5 p.m., meaning I'd been asleep for around 4 hours. I felt a pang of guilt for sleeping so long, yet I also felt truly refreshed. I went downstairs expecting to find Robert and Emma in the living room, but the house was utterly silent. I called out Robert's name and heard him answer from the kitchen. When I entered, he was seated at the table with Emma on his lap, and she was acting unusually fussy. She kept reaching out for me and making these distressed sounds, which was uncharacteristic of her behavior with Robert previously. What was odd, though, was that Robert appeared quite nervous when I came into the kitchen. He began speaking very quickly about how Emma had been wonderful all afternoon, only getting a bit cranky in the last few minutes, likely needing her mom. He immediately handed her over to me and began collecting his belongings, as if he were in a rush to depart. That's when I observed that Emma's hair appeared different. It's difficult to explain, but it seemed as though it had been brushed or combed in a manner I never style it. I always just leave her hair natural because she's a baby and it isn't important, but it looked as if someone had attempted to part it or smooth it down. When I brought it up to Robert, he claimed he'd been playing with her hair while she sat on his lap. But here's what truly bothered me. Emma's outfit was changed again, and this time I was certain of it, because I'd specifically picked the outfit she was wearing that morning. It was a small yellow dress my mom had bought her, and I recalled dressing her in it because it was one of my favorites. Yet, when Robert handed her back to me, she was wearing a simple white onesie I'd never seen previously. When I questioned Robert about the outfit change, he grew defensive and stated Emma had spit up on her dress, so he changed her into something clean he located in her dresser. However, Emma rarely spits up anymore, and when she does, it's typically not enough to necessitate a full outfit change. Furthermore, I knew every item of clothing in her dresser, and I didn't recognize the white onesie whatsoever. I asked Robert where the yellow dress was so I could wash it, and he replied he'd already placed it in the laundry hamper upstairs. But when I checked later, it wasn't there. I searched everywhere for that dress and never found it. It was as if it had simply vanished. The entire interaction left me feeling truly unsettled. Robert departed quite quickly after I came downstairs, which was unusual because he typically enjoys staying and chatting for a bit after babysitting. Emma was also more clingy than usual for the remainder of the day, as if something had distressed her while I was sleeping. I attempted to persuade myself that I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the sensation that something had occurred while I was asleep. That evening, when Jake phoned from his business trip, I informed him about the strange afternoon with his dad. I attempted to clarify why I felt uneasy about it, but Jake suggested I was likely just being overly worried because I was exhausted and stressed from being by myself with Emma. He proposed that perhaps his dad had simply been trying to assist by cleaning Emma, and I was overthinking it, but I couldn't dismiss it. Something about that day felt amiss, and I resolved I needed to discover what was happening. I began observing Robert's conduct more carefully and seeking connections in the issues that had been troubling me. Then it hit me that all the occasions Emma's clothes had been changed while Robert was babysitting, and all his inquiries about her medical details and his unusual remarks about her looks could actually be linked. I began to wonder if Robert was questioning Emma's paternity and had been seeking evidence. That idea made me ill. I couldn't fathom that my father-in-law could truly believe I'd been unfaithful to his son. Yet the more I pondered his actions over the past few months, the more logical it seemed. The specific remarks about heredity, the close examination of Emma's features, the inquiries about my business trips while pregnant. All these things made sense if Robert suspected I'd been having an affair. I resolved I needed to confirm exactly what was happening. I knew that Robert and Jake's mom would be out of town the upcoming weekend to visit Jake's aunt, so their house would be empty. I had been to their home hundreds of times over the years and knew where they kept important records and documents. If Robert had done something like order a paternity test, he would likely keep the results somewhere in his home office. I realize this sounds outlandish, and I'm not proud of what I did next, but I was so desperate to comprehend what was happening. I retrieved Jake's mom's spare key from its hiding place and went to their house while they were away. I felt terrible about essentially breaking in, but I needed to know if my suspicions were accurate. I went directly to Robert's office, which is where he stores all his significant papers and files. I started sifting through his desk drawers and filing cabinets, not entirely sure what I was seeking, but hoping I'd recognize it if I discovered it. That's when I found it. In the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, tucked under some old tax documents, was a manila envelope with Emma's name written on it in Robert's handwriting. Inside the envelope was a paternity test report from a lab I had never heard of. The report was dated from about 6 weeks prior, precisely around the time Robert had been babysitting Emma more often. According to the document, samples had been submitted for both Emma and Jake, and the results showed a 99.97% probabilities that Jake was Emma's biological father. I simply sat there gazing at this report for around 10 minutes, attempting to absorb what I was seeing. My father-in-law had indeed taken samples from my baby daughter and my husband to covertly determine if Emma was Jake's child. He'd been sufficiently distrustful of my loyalty to genuinely pay for a paternity test without informing anyone. Yet this is what made it even worse. The test results plainly indicated that Jake was Emma's father, which meant Robert's suspicions were entirely mistaken. But even after receiving confirmation that I hadn't cheated, he'd never mentioned anything to anyone. He'd simply kept the results concealed and persisted in treating me with the same distrustful demeanor. I captured images of the report with my phone and returned everything precisely where I discovered it. Then I left their house and drove back home, feeling utterly numb. I could not believe that this was my reality. My father-in-law had been so certain I was disloyal that he'd covertly obtained genetic material from my infant daughter to prove it. When Jake returned home from his work trip, I showed him the pictures of the paternity test report. Initially, he didn't believe it was genuine. He repeatedly stated there had to be another explanation, that his father would never perform such an act. But the evidence was plainly visible in black and white. Jake was silent for an extended period after I showed him the report. I think he was attempting to comprehend how his father could have done something so intrusive and damaging without informing anyone. Eventually, he stated he had to confront his father personally and demand an explanation. So yesterday, Jake went over to his parents' house and asked his dad about the paternity test. As per Jake, Robert initially attempted to deny it, but once Jake mentioned he'd viewed the actual report, Robert confessed to his actions. Robert's rationale was that he'd been concerned about Jake being harmed. He stated he'd observed aspects of my conduct during pregnancy that aroused his suspicion, and he wished to safeguard his son from possibly raising another man's offspring. He asserted he intended to inform Jake about the test outcomes eventually, but desired to be certain about how to manage the circumstance first. Jake inquired of his father what particular elements of my conduct had made him suspicious, and seemingly Robert cited my business trips during pregnancy and remarked that I appeared secretive about certain activities. He also mentioned Emma did not resemble Jake sufficiently when she was born, which had heightened his worries. When Jake highlighted that the test findings demonstrated Robert's suspicions were incorrect, Robert declared he was relieved to discover that Emma was certainly Jake's daughter. However, he did not apologize for his actions or recognize how improper they were. Jake returned home from that discussion extremely distressed. He mentioned he'd never witnessed his dad behave so paranoid and intrusive before. Jake also felt wounded that his father had suspected me of cheating without ever discussing his worries with him first. We spoke for hours about what to do next. Jake felt conflicted, caught between his anger at his dad and his wish to try to work things out with family. I was simply enraged. The thought that Robert had been collecting samples from Emma without consent made me feel ill. What if he'd harmed her in some way while gathering whatever he required for the test? What if she'd been frightened or bewildered when he was carrying it out? I also couldn't overlook the fact that even after the test confirmed I hadn't cheated, Robert had kept treating me suspiciously. If he'd genuinely been concerned about safeguarding Jake, wouldn't he have been relieved when the results came back? Instead, he'd merely concealed the evidence and continued behaving as if I might be untrustworthy. After discussing it thoroughly, Jake and I concluded that we needed to cease contact with Robert, at least temporarily. His actions constituted such a breach of our privacy and our trust that we cannot simply pretend it never occurred. He acted behind our backs to covertly test our child, which transgresses every boundary I can imagine. Jake phoned his dad today and informed him that we wouldn't be bringing Emma by anymore, and that we require space from him. Robert became quite defensive, and stated he'd only been attempting to safeguard his family. He asserted that any good father would have acted similarly in his situation. Jake informed his dad that his actions were wrong, regardless of his intentions, and that we can no longer trust him with Emma. Robert grew angry and claimed we were overreacting, saying the test proved Emma was Jake's daughter, so everything should be fine now. That response merely confirmed for me that we made the correct choice. Robert still fails to comprehend why what he did was so problematic. He believes the ends justify the means, that because the test results were what he desired, the privacy violation of obtaining the test secretly doesn't matter. Jake's mom called later and attempted to persuade us to reconsider. She said Robert had made a mistake, but that he loves Emma and simply wanted to ensure she was truly part of the family. She asked us to consider Emma and how she'd miss out on having a relationship with her grandfather. So, am I the jerk for cutting off my father-in-law after discovering he secretly performed a paternity test on my baby? Update 1. After we told Robert we were severing contact, things were quiet for about a day. Then Jake's sister Lisa called and inquired about what was happening because their parents were truly upset. Jake explained the situation to Lisa, and her reaction was completely unexpected. Lisa said she wasn't surprised that their dad had done a paternity test, and that she'd actually been questioning Emma's paternity as well. She said she wasn't surprised that their dad had done a paternity test, and that she'd actually been wondering about Emma's paternity too. She claimed Emma doesn't resemble Jake much to her, and she'd observed some of the same things their dad had noticed about my conduct during pregnancy. I was utterly stunned. I asked Lisa what she meant about my behavior, and she brought up the identical points Robert had mentioned. The work travel, being on my phone more during family gatherings, appearing distracted at times. She said she and Robert had actually discussed their concerns a few months prior. Jake was deeply hurt that his sister had also been suspicious, but had never mentioned anything to him. Lisa said she didn't want to create issues in his marriage over what might just be paranoia, but that she understood why their dad had wanted to know for certain. The conversation with Lisa made me realize that Robert's suspicions weren't entirely baseless. Apparently, multiple people in Jake's family had noticed things that led them to question Emma's paternity. That made me feel even worse, as if Jake's entire family had been observing me and judging my actions without my knowledge. Lisa did say she was pleased the test results showed Emma was definitively Jake's daughter, and that she hoped we could all move past this now that everyone knew for sure. But she also stated she thought we were being too severe on Robert for attempting to protect Jake. Following that discussion, Jake began to wonder if we were overreacting to the entire situation. He noted that if several people in his family had worries, perhaps Robert's actions were more comprehensible. He suggested perhaps his dad had merely managed his concerns incorrectly, but his intentions had been honorable. I grew very frustrated with Jake for beginning to defend his dad's behavior. I reminded him that irrespective of Robert's intentions, his actions still constituted a significant violation. But Jake argued perhaps we should consider that Robert was simply acting as a protective father, and that the test results confirmed there was nothing to be concerned about regardless. He proposed that perhaps we could strive to rebuild trust with his dad instead of entirely severing ties. I felt as though Jake was downplaying his father's actions, which truly bothered me. I inquired how he'd feel if someone covertly collected genetic samples from Emma for any other purpose, and he conceded that would trouble him. But he claimed this situation was distinct because it involved family, and Robert had been genuinely worried. We ultimately had a rather significant argument about it. Jake accused me of being excessively unforgiving and harboring grudges. I accused him of prioritizing his family's sentiments over safeguarding our daughter. It was not a pleasant conversation. The following day, Jake's mom contacted me directly to attempt to reconcile matters. She said Robert felt awful about the entire situation and that he'd learned his lesson. She asked if we could at least try family counseling or mediation to work through the issues. Jake's mom also mentioned that Robert had been noticing signs that made him worry and that he'd only been trying to do right by Jake. She said Robert never meant to hurt anyone and that he was devastated that we were keeping Emma away from him. I told Jake's mom that I appreciated her trying to help, but that I needed time to process everything that had happened. I said I wasn't ready to consider counseling or mediation yet, because I was still too upset about the violation of trust. But Jake's mom kept pushing. She said Emma needed her grandfather in her life, and that this whole situation was hurting the entire family. She asked me to think about what was best for Emma, not just what made me feel better about being wronged. That conversation truly affected me because it made me question whether I was being selfish. I started wondering if maybe everyone was right that I was overreacting. The test did prove that Robert's suspicions were wrong, and he is Emma's grandfather. Maybe I should try to find a way to move past what happened for the sake of family harmony. I'm really confused about what to do now. Jake is starting to lean toward wanting to reconcile with his dad, especially after his sister's reaction made it seem like Robert's suspicions were more reasonable than I'd thought. Am I being too stubborn about this? Should I consider counseling or mediation like Jake's mom suggested? I don't want to be the person who breaks up Jake's family over this, but I also don't know how to get past what Robert did. Update 2. So after everyone told me I was overreacting, I started to wonder if maybe they were right. Jake was getting more and more frustrated with me for not wanting to reconcile with his dad, and I was starting to feel like maybe I was being too harsh. I decided to try to gather more information about exactly what Robert had done, thinking that if I understood his actions better, maybe I could find a way to move past them. I wanted to know how he'd obtained the samples from Emma and Jake, and what the whole process had been like. Jake agreed to ask his dad for more details about how he'd carried out the paternity test. I think Jake was hoping that if we understood Robert's methods better, it might make his actions seem less invasive or frightening. So Jake went over to his parents' house again and asked Robert to explain exactly how he'd obtained the samples for the test. What Robert told him was so much worse than what I'd been imagining. Apparently, Robert had been planning this for months. He'd researched various paternity testing companies and found one that would accept hair samples instead of cheek swabs, because he thought hair would be simpler to collect without anyone noticing. During numerous babysitting sessions, Robert had been pulling hairs from Emma's head while she was asleep or distracted. It required multiple sessions because he repeatedly lost them. He claimed he'd been extremely careful to only gather a few hairs at once so we wouldn't spot it. He'd also been collecting Jake's hair from his old bedroom whenever Jake and I visited for family dinners. But here's the detail that made me utterly furious. Robert confessed that on that final day when I dozed off and left Emma in his care, he'd actually administered some liquid Benadryl to Emma to make her drowsy so she wouldn't stir while he gathered more hair samples. He drugged my baby. Without my awareness or approval, Robert had administered medication to my 8-month-old daughter to simplify his covert genetic testing. When Jake informed me of this, I completely lost it. I started crying and couldn't stop. The idea of Robert administering Emma medication without informing me made me feel physically ill. What if she'd experienced an allergic reaction? What if he'd given her too much? What if something had gone awry while I was sleeping upstairs? Jake was also deeply shaken by this disclosure. He stated he'd never conceived his dad would do anything so perilous and reckless. Administering medication to someone else's child without authorization is not merely improper. It could have been truly detrimental. We promptly contacted Emma's pediatrician to inquire about the safety of Robert's actions. The doctor was appalled when we described the circumstances. She stated that administering Benadryl to an infant without medical oversight and parental permission was exceptionally perilous and possibly unlawful. The pediatrician clarified that babies Emma's age can have unexpected responses to antihistamines, and that the dosage is highly precise based on their weight and medical background. She mentioned Robert could have gravely injured Emma, and that we should think about reporting the event to the police. That discussion with the doctor made me understand how much graver this situation was than I'd initially believed. Robert hadn't merely breached our privacy by covertly testing Emma's paternity. He'd actually jeopardized our daughter's well-being and security to do so. I called the police to inquire about our choices for reporting Robert's actions. The officer I spoke with stated that administering medication to a child without parental permission could possibly be accused as child endangerment or assault. He mentioned we could file a report if we wished to seek legal proceedings. Jake was truly torn about involving law enforcement. He stated he grasped why I was distressed, but that having his dad arrested might be exceeding limits. He asked if we could resolve this as a family issue instead of making it a legal concern. But I noted that this wasn't merely a family dispute any longer. Robert had done things that could be actual crimes against our daughter. The unauthorized medical testing, the secret drugging, all of it might be considered child abuse, according to the pediatrician and the police officer. We chose to confront Robert directly about the Benadryl before deciding whether to file a police report. Jake called his dad, asking him to come over so we could all talk about what had happened. When Robert arrived, he could tell we were truly upset. Jake asked him to explain again about giving Emma the Benadryl, and Robert became defensive immediately. He said he'd only given her a small amount, just enough to make her sleepy so she wouldn't be difficult, while he collected the hair samples. I asked Robert if he understood how dangerous it was to give medication to a baby without telling her parents. He said he'd looked up the dosing online and had been extremely careful. He claimed he'd given her less than the recommended amount, so there was no actual risk, but that answer made me even more angry. Robert had, in essence, conducted a medical experiment on my daughter based on internet research. He had no medical training, no knowledge of Emma's health history, and no right to make decisions about medicating her. When I pointed this out, Robert said I was being dramatic and that Emma had been fine. He said many parents give their kids Benadryl to help them sleep, and that he'd been more careful than most people would be. Jake asked his dad why he'd believed it was acceptable to drug Emma without our knowledge, and Robert replied he'd known we would overreact if he sought permission. He claimed he'd been attempting to spare us the burden of addressing his worries about Emma's paternity. I informed Robert that what he'd done amounted to child abuse, and that we were thinking about reporting him to the authorities. He became very angry and said I was being absurd, asserting that he was Emma's grandfather and would never harm her. But Jake supported me. He told his dad that giving Emma medicine without our awareness was totally unacceptable, no matter his intentions. Jake stated he was disappointed and shocked that his father would jeopardize Emma's safety for any cause. Robert attempted to argue that he'd been shielding Jake from potentially raising another man's child, and that a bit of Benadryl was a minor cost for that peace of mind. He said we ought to be grateful that he'd cared sufficiently to discover the truth. The discussion concluded with Robert storming out of our house, asserting we were both being ungrateful and overly dramatic. He said he'd done nothing amiss, and that we'd regret excluding him from Emma's life because of this. After he departed, Jake and I discussed what to do next. Jake was truly struggling with the predicament because he'd never witnessed this aspect of his father previously. He said he felt as though he didn't know Robert any longer and that he was frightened about what else his dad might be capable of. We chose to file a police report regarding the unauthorized drugging. Even if nothing comes of it legally, we wanted an official record of Robert's actions in case something similar occurs again. We also opted to obtain a restraining order to keep Robert away from Emma. The pediatrician had suggested this as a method to legally safeguard Emma from any future unauthorized medical interventions. Jake's mom phoned later that day, weeping and pleading with us not to involve the police. She stated Robert was merely attempting to be a good father and grandfather, and that we were ruining the family over a misunderstanding. However, I don't believe secretly drugging someone's baby can be termed a misunderstanding. Robert made intentional choices to jeopardize Emma's health for his own aims. That's not something I can pardon or overlook. If you thought that was crazy, listen to this. I'm a 26-year-old woman, and I've been married to my 29-year-old husband for nearly 3 years now. I've always known that my husband's family doesn't much care for me. My husband has 2 younger twin sisters, 23, and a younger brother, 21, and none of them appear to like me much. My mother-in-law feels the same way. I've never quite understood why they, 23, and a younger brother, 21, and none of them appear to like me much. My mother-in-law feels the same way. I've never quite understood why they dislike me so much, but I was resolved to fix it, as I wished to build a good relationship with my in-laws. So this year I chose to plan my mother-in-law's 50th birthday party. My husband cautioned me against it, suggesting that if his family didn't seem to like me, I should simply let it be, rather than trying too hard to be nice and win them over. But I disregarded his advice because I truly wanted to be on good terms with them. I'm simply a people person, and I couldn't bear the idea that these people seemed to dislike me without any clear cause. I needed to set things right. A few days ago, I began planning the party and even attempted to involve my husband's siblings, but they showed no interest whatsoever, telling me to do it all myself if that's what I wanted. I reserved one of my mother-in-law's favorite restaurants, a place where she and her late husband always used to go on dates, and I paid for all the food and decorations well in advance. In fact, I even supervised everything myself, ensuring it all met my mother-in-law's taste and standards, as she was quite particular about such matters. I even invited a few of her closest friends and some relatives, after consulting my husband about who she would want there. Essentially, I paid for everything and planned it all on my own, with a little assistance from my husband, while her own children did absolutely nothing to help and didn't even contribute financially. Yesterday, on the eve of her birthday, we visited her, though my husband initially didn't want to. Anyway, once we arrived, we noticed her other children were already there, and they looked rather surprised to see us, but didn't say anything. After some brief conversation, I finally got to the point and told her we'd be expecting her at the restaurant tomorrow evening, since we had something planned for her. She smiled and thanked my husband for it, but he informed her it was all my doing, and that I was the one she should be thanking. Her expression instantly turned sour, and I was quite bewildered for a moment. I told her I'd invited all her close friends and some family members, and I'd made sure to select all her favorite food, trying to get her to acknowledge my efforts. But a nasty look crossed her face, and she proceeded to say thanks in the most false, sugar-coated tone before telling me that while she appreciated my efforts, she was sorry that I wouldn't be attending. I was shocked and asked her why. She replied that she wanted her 50th to be special, so she wanted it to be a family-only event. While she did consider her friends as family, she didn't consider me family at all, so she'd appreciate it if I made myself scarce the next day. My husband and I looked shocked to the core, and I realized in that moment that he'd been right all along. I never should have put in any effort at all, since she was clearly never going to appreciate any of it ever. My husband's siblings, on the other hand, looked like they were going to burst out laughing any second, which is what pissed me off even more. So I got up, told her that she could go to hell, and if she dared to show up tomorrow, then I'd have security escort her out. That wiped the smug looks off all their faces, and my mother-in-law told me that I was being cold and cruel. So I just laughed in her face and said that it was pretty rich coming from her. After a bit of back and forth where she tried to convince me that I was wrong, I told her that she didn't deserve anything nice and that my decision was final. She and her kids looked furious, and right before I left, she started crying, probably as a last-ditch effort to make me feel sorry, but I didn't care anymore. I was livid. On the drive home, I tried to cancel the reservation, but since it was too late, there was nothing I could do. My husband looked pretty uncomfortable about this whole thing, but refused to make any comment, apart from saying that I did the right thing. Then he went out for a smoke once we got home, which was fine by me since he'd never been too expressive when it came to his family, and preferred to stay out of these things. Moreover, I was the one who had ignored his advice, so it was nice of him to not rub it in my face. Anyway, since I'd already paid for the place and food, I decided to cancel all the invites, which was pretty last minute and ticked off a lot of the guests. But they were mostly my mother-in-law's friends, so I didn't care. Instead, I called over some of my own friends to make it all worth it, since I was pretty annoyed about everything that had happened. My husband also joined in, and I also got him to invite a few of his friends, so that we could party. We got rid of the decor just in time before they came and had a total blast. I posted all the pictures after I came back home today. My sister-in-law texted me saying that I'd ruined her mother's birthday and said that it was incredibly selfish of me to use the venue for myself, especially when I knew how much it meant to my mother-in-law. I don't feel particularly sorry about what I did and think it was perfectly reasonable, though I'm just hoping I'm right. Am I the jerk for canceling my mother-in-law's birthday party that I'd planned after she told me I wasn't welcome there? Update 1. I told my husband about the message his sister had sent me and asked him if I should apologize to his family. He said absolutely not. In fact, he told me that he'd had enough of their behavior and thought it would be best if we decided to cut them off entirely. This was a huge deal since his family relied on him a lot for money and other things, especially my mother-in-law. My husband is relatively well off and runs his own company, so cutting them off would mean she'd have to rely on her other children instead, which was a problem as my husband's siblings were good for nothing and all switched jobs every few months. Truth be told, all of them were very dependent on him for money and other things, so this was a huge decision. I tried to discourage him from doing so, but he was pretty adamant. I'm sure that there's something deeper at play here because, truthfully, I've always noticed that his family grew apart from him the longer we dated. By the time we were getting married, he was quite detached from his family. It wasn't his own fault since I remember him telling me several times that he would invite his family over for dinner while we were dating, and even in the initial stages of our marriage. But they'd always make up some excuse to avoid it. I was sure that I was part of the reason as well, and that was another factor that made me so desperate to build a relationship with my in-laws, so that my husband could also reconnect with his family. I'm quite sure that there's something that my husband isn't telling me or hasn't told me, because he's not the kind of person to simply abandon his family. He used to tell me earlier about how much family meant to him, and so this sudden decision, although fair in light of how my mother-in-law treated me a couple of days back, is very strange and out of character for him. I'm determined to get to the bottom of this because I don't want my husband to be miserable because of me or resent me in the future. I'm just hoping that he finally feels comfortable enough to tell me what made him take such a drastic measure now. Update 2. After a lot of pestering him, my husband finally opened up as to why he's cutting his family off after all these years. I knew that his father had passed away when he was 21, and his siblings were all in school back then. His mother had never worked a day in her life, so naturally it was on him to get to work and be the breadwinner of the family, since the money his dad had left them wouldn't be enough to cover it all. He worked hard day and night, and finally, when he was about 23, he found some investors for his startup, and things finally started looking up for him. He went from barely scraping by to thriving, which was wonderful for him. but it made his family incredibly lazy and materialistic. Now that he was earning more, they grew increasingly reliant on him, but he didn't voice any objections or protest, believing he owed them this, as it's what his father would have wanted him to do. They also treated his girlfriends rather poorly, as they thought that other people in his life would distract him, and his only goal should be to provide for his family. This is why, when we met and it became evident that I wasn't someone they could simply mistreat and push away, given my strong determination to be with my husband, they started growing irritated by my presence and attempted to turn my husband against me. However, by then he'd reached his limit, and there was much arguing and squabbling while we were dating that occurred without my knowledge, where his family wished for him to end things with me, but he was determined to marry me. Eventually, they started pulling away from him, trying to make him feel guilty, but they still sought money from him. This tactic also didn't manage to split us up, and several years later, we're still going strong. After the entire birthday incident, my husband shared that while his sister messaged me to make me feel guilty, his mother had called him to do likewise, and was attempting to emotionally pressure him into leaving me because I'd offended her. That's why he concluded he'd had enough, and it was time to cut ties. I'm still astounded that his family subjected him to all this, even though he's been supporting them all along, and I've virtually lost all respect I ever had for them since they're simply greedy. I'm truly glad I chose to stay with my husband despite his family's efforts to split us and push me away so they could monopolize his money. Honestly, I don't care how much money he has because I love him for who he is, and his bank balance is irrelevant to that. Now that I know the complete truth, I'm surprised he was able to tolerate this, and even keep it hidden from me for so long to protect my feelings, as I'd wanted to form a good connection with my in-laws, but he knew that would never materialize. I believe he's making the correct choice now, and that his family deserves to be cut off. They're unbelievably selfish and greedy, and show no respect for the one man who supported them for so long, despite everything. Update 3. Today my husband finally telephoned his mother and informed her that he doesn't want to hear from her or his siblings unless they alter their behavior. They'll also need to secure their own income, as he isn't going to keep supporting them for the rest of his life. As I had anticipated, this decision was met with an uproar from their side, and I could hear my mother-in-law yelling at my husband, even though his phone wasn't on speakerphone. A rather nasty argument erupted between them, and since I was in the same room as my husband, I overheard every single word. My mother-in-law plainly tried to blame me for this, stating that I must have influenced his decision to cut them off in some way. She also accused me of trying to tear their family apart and declared that my husband shouldn't allow himself to be manipulated by his wife again. The irony of her advising my husband not to let himself be manipulated was quite amusing to me. Naturally, my husband defended me to the best of his ability, and even told her that his siblings need to find proper jobs, because they're all adults now, and it's quite pathetic that they still have to rely on him to provide for them. She then began accusing my husband of letting the money and power from his high-paying position go to his head, and suggested that I was likely encouraging him to cut off his family, which was why he was treating his own blood so cruelly. It was all typical manipulation and emotional blackmail to keep him under her control, but I wasn't going to allow that to continue, now that I understood what she and her other children had been doing. When things began getting too intense, and I could see my husband becoming agitated and on the verge of tears from pure frustration, I decided to step in. I informed her that my husband's decision was final, and if she and her kids didn't start behaving soon, then they'd be losing my husband's support permanently. Now it was up to them. They could either act like decent human beings and respect me and my husband to remain a part of our lives, or they could be the parasitic, materialistic assholes they were and be completely removed from my husband's life. After saying that, I hung up and silenced all notifications on my husband's phone so he wouldn't need to engage with them for some time, and had a chance to compose himself. An hour has passed since the call ended, and we've put our phones away to watch a movie and distract ourselves for the moment. Update 4. Since tormenting my husband and spoiling his day wasn't sufficient, my mother-in-law chose to trouble me instead. After the movie concluded, my husband decided to complete some outstanding tasks, and I chose to look at my phone. I had multiple missed calls from my mother-in-law and countless messages saying utterly vile things to me that were riddled with profanities from my husband's siblings. However, I wasn't surprised at all, as this was precisely what I had anticipated them doing. I simply captured screenshots of everything for future reference and disregarded it. I kept responding to work emails and other things for the next 10 minutes, but then my mother-in-law phoned again, and I inadvertently answered the call. She then went on to utter the most vile comments about me and how I was raised, labeling me a manipulative, self-centered gold digger intent on destroying my husband. I didn't even reply to any of her allegations and merely waited for her to finish. Once she eventually appeared to exhaust herself, I told her that everything she had accused me of doing were actions she herself was guilty of. So before casting blame, she ought to reflect a bit. I also mentioned that I was pleased my husband was finally ridding himself of parasites, like her and her other children, as they didn't even merit breathing the same air as him. After that, I ended the call and blocked her and my husband's siblings on every platform I possibly could, so they could no longer reach me. It's simply disheartening that individuals are prepared to sink to such depths merely to evade doing any work for themselves. I haven't informed my husband about his mother calling me yet, as I simply don't wish to burden him further. But if this occurs again, I will absolutely let him know and ensure they are gone from our lives for good. They have absolutely no right to disrupt our tranquility in this way. I'm unsure what they'll attempt next, but I'm certain my mother-in-law definitely won't cease until we opt to pursue legal action against her or similar. I'm hoping it won't escalate to that, as it would be an immense emotional challenge for my husband. But if it does, I'm prepared to ensure we follow through. They're definitely not bothering my husband any longer. Update 5. Nearly 2 weeks have gone by since the previous update, and a great deal has occurred since then. After I blocked my mother-in-law, my husband and I ate dinner and went to bed, hoping for some calm and quiet the following day. However, the very next day, my mother-in-law appeared at our front door with her 3 adult children and insisted on an explanation for everything that had been spoken and done up to that point. She seemed quite angry, as did my husband's siblings, and I knew for certain this would be highly stressful for my husband. I chose to remain in the room despite their objections, claiming I had no right to be there because it was a family matter and I wasn't family. I informed them they were invading my privacy and were standing beneath my roof, so they had no authority to tell me whether I could stay or not. They then began verbally assailing my husband, overwhelming him with claims of being selfish and unreasonable, even reaching the point of declaring he was forsaking his family merely to please his wife. My husband had remained quiet and was already appearing quite flushed, so I recognized that was my signal to step in, as my husband is a truly sensitive man, particularly concerning his family and those he cares for. I understood he wouldn't be capable of confronting them and shielding himself from their untrue allegations and manipulation, owing to his gentle and kind nature. While they were solely exploiting him for his finances, he genuinely and truly did care for his family. So I urged him to calm down and instructed his family to depart, because they were irritating me and, more significantly, they were causing my husband to weep. My mother-in-law commenced arguing with me, asserting that I don't get to boss her around, especially in her son's home, and that she can remain for as long as she desires. She still didn't cease addressing my husband, even though he appeared quite distressed by the whole situation. It was repulsive to observe that she cared nothing for her own son's emotions, and what mattered most to her was the money. So she began telling him that she hadn't brought him up this way and that she was let down that he was prioritizing his wife over his own family. His brother even stated that his only obligation should be that of a son and a brother, since I was a gold digger anyway and didn't deserve to have a husband like him in the first place. That infuriated me, and I lost my composure at that point. I lashed out at him and told him precisely what I thought of all of them. They were all lazy, good-for-nothing imbeciles who were surviving solely on my husband's kindness and generosity, as they themselves were incapable of achieving anything, and that they were pretty much the definition of gold diggers. Furthermore, not only were they constantly hounding my husband for money, but they also had the nerve to be so ungrateful and target him after everything he had done for them. They were stunned into silence, and I could tell they were struggling to retort, but had nothing to say. Seizing that opportunity, I ordered them to leave before I reported them to the police for showing up uninvited and then refusing to depart. So they left, but my mother-in-law still believed she could persuade my husband to choose them over me, so she remarked that his father would be disappointed had he been alive to witness how their eldest son had treated them today. I thought it was truly pathetic and disgusting to constantly play that card to emotionally blackmail my husband, and by the time they had driven away, I could see that my husband was barely holding himself together. He began crying uncontrollably the moment they left, and I had to spend hours comforting him. I felt awful about the whole situation and wished I'd never even tried to throw my mother-in-law a birthday party. But then again, that's what had opened this can of worms, and I'm glad this came out sooner rather than later. Anyway, after his family departed, I blocked them from his phone and all social media, making sure they couldn't reach us online. After he had calmed down sufficiently, I told him it was time we started looking into lawyers, because I was certain this wouldn't be the last we'd hear from his mother and siblings. He agreed, since as much as he disliked admitting it, he was well aware his family was willing to go to any lengths to get money from him. So we began searching for family lawyers, just to be safe, and we were absolutely right to do so, because within days of that argument, my mother-in-law sent us a legal notice demanding he pay them an extravagant sum of money as compensation for stealing tons and tons of money from them after his father's death to start his business. It was appalling to me that she and her children were willing to lie about something so enormous and defame my husband. He'd never taken a single dollar from anything his father had left them, but had only used money he'd earned himself. He was entirely self-made, and making such a claim was an affront to his character. I was outraged that they dared spread such a falsehood. Since my husband's company is quite substantial, it also generated much discussion, which certainly impacted his business, and that was foolish of them. Nevertheless, in just under 2 weeks, we were able to prove they were lying, and none of their allegations held any truth. Consequently, they're the ones who must pay us a hefty fine for attempting to defame us and jeopardize my husband's career. The latest I heard, my mother-in-law and her children have been shunned by the rest of the family because of their malicious little scheme, and all 3 of those idle fools are frantically seeking employment so they can pay the expenses my husband has covered until now. I'm pleased this is occurring for them because they completely and utterly deserve this. We can finally put this entire ordeal behind us and forget them entirely. My husband and I are much happier now, and I plan to maintain it this way indefinitely. Time for another story you won't believe. I need to explain what happened because I'm still trying to process how everything went south so quickly, and how my own wife turned against me when all I did was try to help her sister through a difficult period. My wife Dana has a younger sister named Jessica, who's always been a bit dramatic, but I never truly minded her since she mostly kept to herself, and we only saw her at family get-togethers, where she would drink too much wine and complain about whatever guy she was dating back then. Jessica got married roughly 4 years ago to this guy Mark, who seemed decent enough. He had a good job working at some insurance company and treated her well from what I could tell, but Jessica always found something to nitpick about him, and Dana would just roll her eyes and say that's how Jessica is with everything. Jessica would complain that Mark worked too much, or that he didn't take her out to fancy restaurants often enough, or that he spent too much time watching sports on weekends. Dana would listen patiently and then tell me later that Jessica had unrealistic expectations about what marriage was truly like. I never got involved in these discussions because I figured it was sister stuff and none of my business. But I could tell that Dana was growing weary of always being Jessica's emotional support system for every minor problem in her relationship. About 8 months ago, Jessica called Donna, crying at around 11 o'clock at night, because Mark had asked for a divorce, and she was completely blindsided by it, even though Dana and I both knew their marriage had been rocky for a while, because Jessica would constantly post these passive-aggressive things on social media about how hard it is to be married to someone who doesn't appreciate you. Donna would show me these posts, and we'd both just shake our heads. Jessica's Facebook was always full of these cryptic posts about being taken for granted, and how some people don't know what they have until it's gone. And Dana would get embarrassed because everyone in their family could see that Jessica was obviously talking about Mark. When Jessica called that night, she was hysterical and kept saying she had nowhere to go because Mark wanted to keep the house, and she couldn't afford to live on her own since she only worked part-time, which barely paid anything. Jessica had always been bad with money and had gotten used to Mark paying for most of their expenses, so the idea of supporting herself financially was terrifying to her, and she kept crying about how she was going to end up homeless and living in her car. Dana immediately offered to let Jessica stay with us for a few weeks until she could figure things out, and I agreed because I figured Jessica just needed some family support during this tough time, and it would probably only be temporary anyway. Dana has always felt a strong bond with her family, and I knew it would matter a great deal to her to assist her sister. So I informed Dana that Jessica was welcome to stay in our guest room for as long as she needed to get back on her feet. I believe perhaps some time apart from Mark would help Jessica gain some insight into what had gone wrong in her marriage, and potentially they could reconcile. But Dana said that based on what Jessica was relaying to her, the divorce was certainly going to happen, and Mark had already consulted a lawyer. Jessica relocated the following weekend with only a few suitcases and a lot of tears about how Mark had changed the locks and refused to let her retrieve her remaining belongings, which struck me as quite extreme, but I wished to avoid their drama, so I simply helped carry her bags upstairs and encouraged her to settle in. Dana took the entire week off from work to help Jessica locate an apartment and a lawyer, essentially guiding her through every step, while Jessica merely sat on our couch, watching TV and weeping into boxes of tissues. I continued working my regular schedule because someone needed to keep earning income, and I assumed Dana was better equipped to handle the emotional aspects regardless. Furthermore, Jessica appeared to prefer discussing all the intimate details of her marriage issues with Dana. The initial few weeks weren't too bad because Dana was managing most of the emotional support, and I would simply nod along when Jessica vented about Mark during dinner. However, then Dana had to return to work because she had already used up most of her vacation time, and her boss was becoming annoyed about her frequent absences. Dana is employed and has always been very dedicated to her job, so taking an entire week off to deal with family drama was already pushing it, and she couldn't afford to take any more time off without risking termination. I work from home, so I'm usually around during the day, and Jessica started coming to me more often when she was upset about something because Dana wasn't available to talk during work hours. Jessica would knock on my office door and ask if I had a few minutes to talk because she was having a panic attack or because her lawyer had called with bad news about the divorce proceedings, and I felt bad for her because she was clearly going through a rough time, and I could see that talking to someone helped calm her down. I would take breaks from work to sit with her in the living room while she explained whatever new crisis had arisen, like how Mark's lawyer was trying to claim that Jessica wasn't entitled to half of their savings because she hadn't contributed much financially to the marriage, or how Mark was being difficult about letting her retrieve her personal belongings from the house. Jessica would always express gratitude for my attentive listening, saying I was the sole person who truly understood her situation, which I interpreted as her simply being thankful for the support during a challenging time in her life. This continued for about 6 weeks, and I began to observe that Jessica was approaching me instead of calling Dana at work when she needed to talk, and she would consistently wait until Dana had departed for the office before seeking me out. I didn't give it much thought initially, assuming she simply didn't want to disturb Dana at work and knew I was available. Moreover, Jessica seemed to be growing more comfortable around the house, treating it more like her temporary residence, rather than just a place she was staying. Jessica began doing things like cooking dinner for all of us, doing laundry and cleaning the house, which was actually beneficial because Dana and I both work full-time and don't always have the energy for household chores. Jessica would have dinner ready when Dana returned from work and would always make sure to ask me what I wanted to eat, or if I had any food preferences. And she would buy groceries and prepare these meals as if she were trying to demonstrate her usefulness around the house. But then Jessica began staying up late to wait for me when I would get home from going out with friends or running errands, and she would be sitting in the living room in her pajamas when I walked in and would immediately start talking about how lonely she felt and how she couldn't sleep because she kept dwelling on everything that had gone wrong with her marriage. I would generally just listen for a while and then suggest that she might feel better if she attempted to get some rest, but Jessica would persist in talking and following me around the house, even when I was clearly trying to end the conversation and go to bed. Jessica would follow me into the kitchen when I went to get a glass of water, or would come upstairs and knock on the bathroom door when I was preparing for bed, and she would continue talking through the door about how she appreciated having someone to talk to, and how much better she felt after our conversations. I began to feel that Jessica was growing too dependent on me for emotional support, and that perhaps she should be talking to a therapist, or joining some kind of divorce support group instead of relying on me so much. One night, roughly 2 months after she moved in, I came home from having drinks with some coworkers, and Jessica was waiting for me in the kitchen, wearing this silk nightgown that was excessively revealing for someone staying in their brother-in-law's house. She had uncorked a bottle of wine and poured 2 glasses, and when I walked in, she offered me one and began discussing how thankful she was for all I'd done for her, and how I was a far better man than Mark or any of the other guys she had dated. I accepted the wine because I wished not to be impolite, but I maintained the discussion on practical matters, like the progress of her apartment search, and if she had received responses from any of the jobs she had applied to. Jessica had been viewing apartments for weeks, but consistently found reasons not to submit applications, like the rent was excessive, or the neighborhood felt unsafe, or the apartment lacked sufficient space, and I was beginning to question if she was genuinely serious about moving out, or if she was becoming overly comfortable living with us. Jessica continually redirected the conversation to more personal subjects, and repeatedly touched my arm when she laughed at something I remarked, which caused me unease because it seemed as though she was being flirtatious rather than merely friendly. She would draw near when she spoke and would discover pretexts to brush against me as she reached for items, and she continually praised my understanding nature and how greatly she enjoyed our conversations. Following approximately 20 minutes of this, I informed Jessica that I was fatigued and needed to rest, and I began to move toward the staircase, but she took my hand and stated she had something significant to convey. She looked at me with these big, sad eyes and mentioned that spending time with me had made her understand what she had been missing in her marriage, and that she had developed feelings for me that went beyond simply being grateful for my assistance. I quickly withdrew my hand and told her she was simply confused because she was experiencing a divorce, and that she didn't truly feel anything for me. She was merely seeking someone to comfort her about all that was occurring with Mark. Jessica became upset and stated that I was mistaken, and that she had been considering this for weeks, and that she could sense I felt something as well, given how much time we spent conversing and how I was constantly so patient and kind towards her. I informed her quite plainly that I was wed to her sister, and that nothing would ever occur between us, and that she had to cease thinking of me in that manner, because it was utterly improper. Jessica began weeping and claiming that Dana failed to value me as she did, and that Dana was consistently working late and failed to give me sufficient attention, which angered me because Jessica possessed no right to remark on my marriage or imply that anything was amiss with it. I ascended upstairs without another word and headed directly to bed, but I was unable to sleep because I was concerned about how this would impact matters with Dana, and if I should inform her of what occurred immediately, or await to see if Jessica would let it go and behave normally once more. I decided to wait and observe what transpired the next day, hoping that Jessica would recognize her error and we could simply pretend the entire conversation never happened, and perhaps she would be embarrassed enough about it that she would finally begin searching for her own residence more earnestly. But when Dana departed for work the following morning, Jessica came to my office and started apologizing for what she had uttered the night before. But then she stated that she still meant every word of it, and that she couldn't control her feelings for me. She claimed that she had been contemplating it all night, and that she believed I harbored feelings for her too, but I was merely being loyal to Dana, and that if I would just afford her a chance, she could make me happier than Dana ever could. I informed Jessica that she was utterly mistaken, and that I loved my wife and held no romantic feelings for her whatsoever, and that if she couldn't respect my marriage, then she needed to locate another place to reside. Jessica grew defensive and asserted that I was the one who had been leading her on by spending so much time conversing with her and being so understanding about her problems, and that I couldn't fault her for misinterpreting the signals I had been sending. I told her that I had been endeavoring to assist her as family, and that there were never any signals of any kind, and that she needed to cease this entire matter immediately before it caused serious complications. Jessica began weeping once more and stated she was regretful and would endeavor to manage her emotions, but then she inquired if we could still converse when she was distressed, because speaking with me was the sole thing that brought her solace regarding the divorce. I replied that I believed it would be preferable if she spoke with Dana, or perhaps located a therapist to assist her in processing her feelings about the divorce, and Jessica became incensed and claimed that I was forsaking her when she required me most, and that she thought I cared for her more profoundly than that. I informed her that I did indeed care for her, as Dana's sister, but that she was requesting something I could not provide. And then I returned to my office, shutting the door, and attempted to concentrate on work despite being entirely shaken by the entire conversation. Over the subsequent few days, Jessica barely addressed me and would exit the room whenever I entered, which was actually a comfort, as I hoped it signified she was overcoming whatever she believed she felt. She would still converse with Dana as usual and would still perform household tasks such as cooking and cleaning, but whenever I was present, she would behave coolly and distantly and would shun making eye contact with me. Dana inquired if anything was amiss, because Jessica appeared distressed about something and was behaving oddly around me, and I nearly recounted what had transpired, but I chose to postpone a bit longer to ascertain if the predicament would resolve itself without needing to involve Dana. I was hoping that Jessica would realize how inappropriate her behavior had been, and would either apologize and go back to normal, or would find her own place and move out. But instead, she seemed to be getting more resentful and angry with me for rejecting her. She would make these passive, aggressive comments during dinner about how some people lead others on, and then act like the victim when things get complicated, and she would sigh dramatically whenever I came into a room, like my presence was ruining her day. That was a mistake because the following weekend we went to Dana's parents' house for her father's birthday dinner, and Jessica was acting strange the whole time, being overly affectionate with Dana and making these comments about how lucky Dana was to have such a supportive husband, and how some men just can't be trusted, no matter how nice they seem. I thought she was just being passive-aggressive because I had rejected her. But Dana's mom picked up on the weird vibe and asked Jessica if everything was okay. Dana's parents live in this house where they've hosted family dinners for years, and everyone was there, including Dana's brother Tom and his partner and Dana's aunt and uncle. So there were probably 10 or 12 people sitting around the dining room table when Jessica decided to drop her bomb. We had just finished eating the main course, and Dana's father was opening a bottle of wine to commemorate his birthday, when Dana's mom noticed that Jessica seemed upset and distracted. Jessica began weeping and stated that she had something she needed to tell the family, but that it was quite difficult to discuss, and everyone congregated near her, assuming she was going to provide an update regarding her divorce proceedings, or perhaps declare that she had something she needed to tell the family, but that it was quite difficult to discuss, and everyone congregated near her, assuming she was going to provide an update regarding her divorce proceedings, or perhaps declare that she had found an apartment or a new job. Instead, Jessica gazed directly at me and stated that I had been making improper overtures toward her during her stay at our home, and that she had been attempting to manage it discreetly, but that it was causing her discomfort, and she was unsure what to do. I was so stunned that I couldn't utter a word for several moments, and then I stated that Jessica was so stunned that I couldn't utter a word for several moments, and then I stated that Jessica was fabricating and that she was the one who had made overtures toward me. But Jessica instantly began weeping more intensely and stated that I was endeavoring to shift the blame to her, and that she would never have spoken up if I hadn't been so insistent regarding it. Dana's entire family was gazing at me as if I were a predator of sorts, and Dana appeared utterly devastated and bewildered, as though she couldn't fathom what she was hearing. Jessica proceeded to state that I had been commending her looks, and Dana appeared utterly devastated and perplexed, as if she could not credit what she was hearing. Jessica continued by stating that I had been praising her appearance and inquiring personal details about her marriage and touching her in manners that made her uneasy, and that she had initially attempted to disregard it because she was thankful for the accommodation, but that it had been escalating, and she was fearful of being solitary in the house with me. She asserted that I had informed her that Dana did not comprehend me, and that I was drawn to her, and that I had attempted to kiss her the prior night, which was an utter falsehood. Yet everyone was clinging to every word she uttered. I endeavored to clarify precisely what had occurred, and how Jessica had been the one who made advances toward me. But Jessica continuously interrupted, asserting that I was untruthful, and that she had been apprehensive to speak up because she knew no one would credit her. Dana's father rose and instructed me that I needed to depart instantly, and that I was no longer welcome in their home, and Dana's mother was embracing Jessica and informing her of her courage for speaking out, and how regretful she was that Jessica had to endure such a thing. Dana's brother Tom was staring intensely at me, as if he wished to strike me, and repeatedly questioned how I could commit such an act against someone who was undergoing a divorce and residing in my home. The entire room sided against me within minutes, and no one wished to hear my side of the story, because Jessica was crying and appeared so distraught and traumatized. Donna was simply sitting there, gazing back and forth between me and Jessica, as if she didn't know what to credit, and when I tried to talk to her, she instructed me not to utter anything further, and that we would address it at home. I could not believe that my own wife wasn't instantly defending me against these clearly untrue allegations, but I could see that everyone had already formed their judgments about what they thought had happened, and nothing I stated would alter their viewpoint. The drive home was utterly silent, and when we arrived at the house, Dana proceeded directly upstairs to our bedroom and secured the door, and I passed the night on the couch, endeavoring to comprehend how everything had unraveled so swiftly. I could not comprehend how Jessica could be so heartless and scheming as to ruin my marriage and my connection with Dana's family simply because I had spurned her overtures. The next morning, Dana appeared and said that she had been thinking about it all night, and that she recalled how much time I had been spending talking to Jessica, and how Jessica had seemed uneasy around me recently. She said that, in retrospect, she could see indications that something inappropriate had been happening, like how Jessica would always wait for me to come home, and how she would find excuses to be around me when Dana wasn't there. I attempted to explain again that Jessica had been seeking emotional support from me, and that I had been trying to help her through her divorce. But Dana said that maybe I had misinterpreted Jessica's vulnerability and taken advantage of the situation without realizing it. My temper flared, and I told Donna that I knew exactly what had happened, and that Jessica was lying to cover up the fact that she had made a pass at me and I had rejected her, and that Jessica was probably hoping that if she dissolved our marriage, then maybe I would be available for her after all. Donna said that she wished to trust me, but that Jessica seemed truly distressed and frightened, and that she couldn't understand why Jessica would make up something like that if it wasn't true. She said that Jessica had provided her with precise particulars about things I had allegedly said and done, and that Jessica's narrative was coherent and credible, while my account appeared defensive and motivated by self-interest. She said that maybe I had been unintentionally sending mixed signals, and that Jessica had construed my kindness as romantic interest, and that when I attempted to clarify matters, it had been perceived as rejection, and Jessica felt compelled to protect herself by informing the family of the situation. Dana continued to seek plausible explanations for how matters could have become so muddled, but each explanation she proposed made me appear as either a predator or a fool unable to control himself around his sister-in-law. I was unable to believe that Donna was attempting to excuse Jessica's conduct and portray me as the villain when I had committed no wrong beyond trying to assist her sister during a challenging period. I told Dana that I had been entirely proper in all my dealings with Jessica, and that Jessica was fully aware of her actions when she accused me of an act I did not commit, and that Dana was opting to believe a deceiver over her own husband. Dana said that she required some room to ponder everything, and that perhaps I should reside elsewhere for a few days, while she endeavored to process her emotions regarding the circumstances. I asked her if she truly believed I would be unfaithful to her with her own sister, and Dana said that she no longer knew what to credit, but that Jessica's account appeared coherent. I packed a bag and relocated to my brother's house, and for the next week I repeatedly called Donna, attempting to persuade her that Jessica was lying, but Donna would scarcely speak to me and continued to insist that she required more time to process everything. Meanwhile, Jessica departed our home and resided with Dana's parents, and Dana's entire family treated me like I was a type of predator who had victimized Jessica in her vulnerable state. I felt as though I inhabited an alternate reality where truth and falsehood were inverted, and regardless of how often I explained the true events, no one wished to hear my perspective. My own friends began treating me differently because rumors had circulated regarding Jessica's claims, and I could discern people discussing me furtively and questioning the veracity of the accusations. Following 2 weeks of this, I persuaded Dana to meet me for an in-person discussion, and I believed that if I could simply get her to genuinely listen, free from distractions, then I could make her grasp that Jessica was orchestrating the entire scenario. However, when I commenced to re-explain everything, Dana interjected, stating that she had spoken with Jessica multiple additional times, and that Jessica had provided her with even further particulars about actions and statements I had allegedly made. Dana conveyed that Jessica informed her I had been praising her appearance and inquiring personal details about her marriage and her sex life, and that I had touched her shoulder and her hand in manners that caused her discomfort. She mentioned that Jessica had recounted specific discussions where I had allegedly stated that Dana didn't value me, and that I was drawn to Jessica, and considered her romantically, which were all utter fabrications, yet Dana appeared to credit every single word. I informed Dana that Jessica was inventing all of that, and that the sole instance I had ever touched Jessica was when she seized my hand that evening in the kitchen. But Dana responded that Jessica seemed too distressed and traumatized to be fabricating something so grave. She stated that Jessica had been experiencing nightmares and panic attacks since her departure, and that she was consulting a therapist to cope with the trauma of what I had allegedly subjected her to. I questioned Dana how she could accept Jessica's testimony over mine when Jessica possessed a history of being melodramatic and untruthful about matters. And I reminded Dana of all the occasions Jessica had deceived their parents about her whereabouts or activities during their upbringing. Dana became defensive and asserted that this was entirely dissimilar and that Jessica would not fabricate something that could ruin our marriage unless it was factual, and that I was being unjust by referencing events from Jessica's teenage years. I understood that Dinah had already decided, and that nothing I said would shift her view, and I grew angry and told her that she was choosing to believe a manipulative deceiver over her own husband, who had never provided her with any cause to question his loyalty. Dana started weeping and said that she wished to believe me, but that Jessica's account of events made more sense to her than mine. The entire discussion was completely insane, and I realized that Dinah was never going to believe me no matter what I said or how much proof I offered. So I told her I was done trying to convince her and that she could choose between her deceitful sister and her blameless husband. Dana said that she had already made her choice and that she thought we should get a divorce because she couldn't trust me anymore and didn't think our marriage could endure this kind of treachery. I moved out permanently the following week, and Dana filed for a divorce a month later, and now I'm living in a one-bedroom apartment, trying to rebuild my life while Jessica gets to play the victim, and Dana gets to feel like she made the right choice by defending her poor, blameless sister. The divorce process has been a nightmare because Dana's lawyer is trying to use Jessica's accusations to argue that I have a pattern of inappropriate behavior and that Dana should receive most of our assets as recompense for the emotional trauma I supposedly caused. Dana's friends and family all consider me a sort of predator now, and I've lost a significant portion of my social circle because people don't want to associate with someone who allegedly harassed his sister-in-law. I've been compelled to seek out new places to shop and dine because I continually encounter individuals who are aware of the accusations and who regard me as some kind of monster. The worst part is that I truly cared for Jessica and aimed to assist her navigate her divorce, and she repaid that kindness by demolishing my marriage and my reputation. I continually reflect on how different things would be if I had simply instructed Jessica to speak with Dana, rather than hearing her troubles personally, but I never conceived that an individual would be cruel enough to transform a gesture of familial assistance into a weapon against me. Now I'm commencing anew at 35 years old and endeavoring to comprehend how to regain trust in others when someone I considered family was prepared to falsify information about me to achieve her desires. I know that I committed no wrongdoing, and I know that Jessica is a deceiver and a manipulator, but none of that holds significance because all relevant individuals credit her narrative over mine, and I am the one compelled to endure the repercussions of her falsehoods. I've considered attempting to show that Jessica was lying, but I don't know how one proves a conversation that was solely between us. And even if I could somehow show that Jessica fabricated the entire story, I don't believe Dana would reconcile with me now because she's convinced herself she made the correct decision, and admitting her error would mean accepting she ruined our marriage based on lies. Now, on to a story that will leave you speechless. I'm 19 years old, and I've been handling this situation for far too long. And I need some advice because I truly don't know what to do anymore. And my mom consistently takes his side no matter what occurs between us. When I was 14, my dad simply left one day, and my mom told me he stated he didn't want to be a father anymore and was done with our family. And back then I believed her, because what else was I to think when your own father just vanishes like that without even saying goodbye? My mom cried constantly for about 2 weeks after he departed, and she kept saying things such as, how could he do this to us, and how we would be fine without him. And I recall feeling so angry at my dad for making my mom cry that way because she didn't merit it. But then something strange occurred, because after those 2 weeks, my mom simply stopped being sad, and she began going out more, getting her hair styled and purchasing new clothes. And she was always on her phone, texting someone and smiling at her screen, which I found odd, because shouldn't she be more upset about her husband leaving her? I inquired who she was texting, and she replied it was just her sister assisting her through this tough period. But her sister lives across the country, and they never truly spoke much before, so I found it peculiar. About a month after my dad left, my mom began bringing this guy named Robert to the house, and she introduced him as a friend from work who was helping her with some legal matters about the divorce. And Robert seemed pleasant enough, I suppose, but he was always present at our house, eating dinner with us and watching TV with us, as if he lived there or something. My mom said he was simply being supportive during a difficult time, and that I should be appreciative. Someone was prepared to help our family. And I didn't give it much thought, because I was managing my own things at school and trying to understand why my dad left us. Then one day my mom sat me down and told me that she and Robert had been spending considerable time together and that they had developed feelings for one another. And she said sometimes when people experience trauma, they find comfort in unexpected places, and that Robert made her feel happy once more after such a bleak period in her life. She said they were going to begin dating officially, and that she hoped I would be fine with it because she deserved to be happy after what my dad subjected her to. And I recall feeling confused because it felt very quick, but I wished for my mom to be happy, so I agreed. They got married precisely 4 months after my dad left, and my mom said they didn't wish to delay because life is brief, and when you know you found the right person, you shouldn't squander time. Robert then relocated to our house, and abruptly everything shifted because now there was this man, residing in my dad's space, sleeping in my dad's bed, and seated in my dad's chair at the dinner table. My mom appeared truly happy, however, and she was constantly laughing at Robert's jokes, clinging to his arm and addressing him as honey and sweetheart. She repeatedly mentioned how fortunate she was to find someone who treated her so kindly, after being with someone who evidently didn't value her. Initially, Robert was very kind to me. He would inquire about school, propose to assist with my homework, and he even brought me to a baseball game once. My mom repeatedly stated how wonderful it was that I finally had a constructive male role model in my life since my dad had plainly failed in that area. But after their marriage and once he formally moved in, Robert began to alter. He started remarking about how I had to contribute more and assist further within the house because I was mature enough to assume responsibility, and he began assigning me tasks and regulations that my mom had never imposed previously. He established a rule that I was required to be home by 9 p.m. on school nights and 10 p.m. on weekends, and I had to seek permission before inviting friends over, and I was to maintain my room spotless at all times, because he claimed an untidy room indicated a lack of regard for the household. My mom agreed with all of this and said Robert was correct that I needed more structure in my life because my dad never instilled discipline in me. And when I objected, she stated I ought to be thankful that Robert cared sufficiently about my future to establish limits. As I matured, the tension between Robert and me continued to worsen because he began treating me as if I were some sort of burden he was forced to manage, and he would remark about my excessive food consumption or using too much hot water, or leaving lights illuminated and squandering electricity. He started scrutinizing every minor action I took, and he would inquire of my mom why I required new clothes or school supplies, and he would utter remarks such as when he was my age. He earned everything he obtained, and perhaps I should seek employment if I desired additional items. My mom consistently defended him and said he was simply attempting to impart the value of money and hard work, and she stated I was being unappreciative and that Robert was doing me a kindness by endeavoring to shape me into a responsible young man. But it felt like he was nitpicking every single thing I did and making me feel unwanted in my own home, and I started spending more time at my friend Jake's house because his family was typical, and his parents didn't make him feel like a burden just for existing. When I turned 18 last year, Robert sat me down and told me that now that I was a legal adult, I needed to start financially contributing to the household or begin planning to move out. And he said it was unfair for me to live rent-free when other people my age were being self-sufficient or attending college. I told him I was intending to attend community college and work part-time, but I needed time to save money and sort things out. And he said I had until my 19th birthday to either start paying rent or locate another place to reside. My mom was sitting right there when he said this, and she simply agreed and said Robert was being reasonable and that most parents would have evicted me already. And she said maybe this would spur me to become serious about my future instead of just drifting through life. I couldn't believe she was siding with him, and I said this was my home too, and I shouldn't be required to pay rent to live in the house I was raised in. And Robert said, in fact, this was his and my mom's house now, and I was a guest who had exceeded his welcome. That's when I truly erupted, and I started shouting at him that he wasn't my dad, and he possessed no right to force me from my own house. And I stated he was merely some stranger who moved in and assumed control of everything, and now he wished to remove me because I was an obstacle. Robert started shouting in return that I was a thankless young brat who had no regard for authority, and that my attitude was precisely why my biological father departed in the first place. And he said, perhaps, if I wasn't such a difficult kid, my dad would have remained. My mom started weeping and yelling at both of us to cease arguing, and she said she couldn't manage all this contention in her house, and she said I ought to apologize to Robert for being disrespectful, and that Robert was merely attempting to aid me in becoming self-reliant. I said I wouldn't apologize for anything because Robert was the one acting unreasonably and attempting to evict me. And my mom said if I couldn't demonstrate respect for her husband, then perhaps I did need to locate another place to reside. I couldn't believe my own mother was prioritizing this man over her own son, and I expressed that to her, and she said she wasn't making a choice. But she couldn't have me challenging Robert's authority in their home because it was creating excessive strain on their marriage. She said Robert had been only good to both of us, and he merited better than contending with my attitude all the time, and she said perhaps a period of separation would help me value what I possessed. So now my 19th birthday is approaching in 2 months, and Robert continually remarks that I should start searching for apartments or roommates because the deadline is nearing, and my mom acts like this is all entirely typical and fair. I work part-time, but I scarcely earn enough to cover fuel and food, and there's no possibility I can afford rent, utilities, and all those expenses, and most of my friends are heading off to college, so I can't truly share a room with anyone I know. I feel like I'm being forced out of my own family, and I don't understand how my mom can just agree to this when I'm her son, and Robert is merely some man she wed after knowing him for only about 4 months. I know I'm officially an adult, but I'm still in my first year of community college, and I'm attempting to sort out my life, and I have nowhere to go, and it feels like Robert simply desires me gone so he can have my mom entirely to himself. I don't know if I should try another discussion with my mom when Robert isn't present to see if she'll consider reason, or if I should just begin preparing to move out and accept that this is the new reality. I love my mom, but I feel like she's entirely transformed since marrying Robert, and she appears indifferent to my fate as long as he's content. Is it unreasonable of me to believe I should be able to remain in my family home while I'm organizing my life? Or is Robert correct that I must be independent now that I'm 18? I simply don't know what to do anymore, and I feel as though I'm losing my family. Update. I posted several weeks ago about my stepfather, Robert, wanting me out of the house by my 19th birthday, and many people offered me advice about speaking with my mom privately and attempting to resolve things. So I decided to try that method before completely giving up on my mom. I waited for a day when Robert would be at working late, and I asked my mom if we could talk seriously about the whole moving out issue. And I told her I felt she was picking Robert over me, and that it pained me she was fine with me being forced out of my childhood home. I mentioned I understood Robert was her husband, but I was her son, and I believed that ought to matter, and I questioned if she truly felt it was fair to make me leave while I was still sorting out my life and attending school. My mom became quite defensive and claimed I was being manipulative, trying to force her to choose between her son and her husband, and she stated Robert wasn't requesting anything unreasonable, since most parents expect their children to be independent by 19. She mentioned I'd had ample time to get ready for this, and instead of planning, I was simply complaining and waiting for others to fix my issues. And she added that perhaps my dad was correct, that I needed to grasp some responsibility. I inquired what she implied by that, and she replied, "My dad always believed I was too spoiled, and that I anticipated everything would be given to me without effort." And she stated, Robert was merely attempting to complete the task of raising me that my dad had begun but never finished. I replied that was an odd remark, given my dad deserted us and left her to bring me up by herself. And she became quite furious and said my dad didn't abandon us. He chose to depart because he couldn't cope with the stress of our family's circumstances. That's when Robert arrived home early and overheard us speaking, and he inquired what was happening, and my mom informed him I was attempting to make her feel guilty to let me remain beyond my birthday without adding anything to the home. Robert stated he was weary of this discussion and that we had already resolved this issue weeks prior, and he said I had to accept I was an adult presently, and adults don't reside with their parents without cost. I said I wasn't requesting to live without cost indefinitely. I simply needed more time to save money and become self-sufficient, and Robert said he had afforded me ample time, and that my mom and he merited their own space without a grown man residing in their home. He mentioned when he was my age he was already self-supporting, and he lacked parents, who pampered him and justified his idleness, and he said my inability to achieve independence by 19 indicated my parents hadn't readied me for the actual world. I began to get quite furious, and I said he lacked the right to speak of my parents' failures when he wasn't even my parent, and had only been part of my life for a short time, and I said he was merely trying to remove me because he desired my mom entirely to himself. Robert stated I was mistaken if I believed this was about him wanting my mom to himself, as they were married adults who didn't need to concern themselves with what some teenager thought about their relationship. And he said I was simply upset because I could no longer manipulate my mom, now that there was another adult in the house who wouldn't tolerate my foolishness. My mom started weeping once more and said she couldn't bear all this conflict and turmoil in her house. And she said she was weary of feeling compelled to choose between the two most important men in her life. She said Robert was her husband and partner, and I was her son, and she cared for both of us, but she couldn't have us perpetually in conflict because it was making her ill from stress. Then Robert said, all right, he would simplify this for everyone, and he issued an ultimatum that I had precisely 2 weeks to locate another place to reside, irrespective of my birthday, and he said if I hadn't vacated by then, he would begin to charge me $800 monthly for rent and utilities, which he was aware I couldn't manage with my income. He said this was not open for negotiation, and it was no longer subject to debate, because he was finished tolerating my demeanor and disregard, and he said my mom could opt to endorse his decision or permit me to take advantage of them both, but he would not persist in residing in a home where he lacked respect. My mother gazed at me, then at Robert, and she stated she felt 2 weeks was a sensible period for me to finalize arrangements, and she added Robert was correct that this circumstance had persisted excessively and was generating too much discord in their marriage. She expressed hope that I would grasp she needed to back her husband's choice, because that's what spouses do for one another, and she mentioned once I was older and married myself, I would comprehend why she had to side with Robert in this matter. I asked, "So you're truly going to expel your own son for some fellow you've been acquainted with for 5 years?" And my mom replied, "Robert wasn't just some fellow. He was her husband, and the individual who had been financially sustaining our family since my dad abandoned us without anything." She stated I was being unjust by referring to Robert as some guy, when he had been more of a father to me than my biological father ever was. And she added I should be thankful for all Robert had accomplished for our family, instead of behaving as if he were an adversary. I retorted Robert had done nothing for me, save for making my life wretched and attempting to dictate everything I did, and Robert replied he had provided food for me for 5 years, and that I was the most thankless individual he had ever encountered. He stated he was finished squandering his time and effort on someone who plainly didn't value anything he had accomplished, and he said my mom merited better than having to contend with a stepson who couldn't exhibit fundamental respect for the man who had rescued our family from financial disaster. I questioned my mom if that was truly how she felt, and if she honestly believed Robert had salvaged our family, and she replied, yes. Robert had supported us when my dad abandoned us with nothing, and I needed to demonstrate some gratitude for that. She mentioned Robert wasn't obligated to undertake the duty of bringing up another man's child, but he did so regardless because he cared for her, and she stated the least I could do was display some thankfulness and regard instead of complicating their lives. There. Consequently, I telephoned my friend Jake and inquired if I could reside with his family for a period, and he spoke with his parents, and they consented, and I gathered all my belongings and departed that very evening, because I wasn't going to linger and hear my mom and Robert discuss what a burden I was. Jake's parents are truly kind, and they said I could remain for as long as necessary to become self-sufficient, and they're only requesting me to assist with groceries and perform some household tasks, which appears far more sensible than what Robert was requiring. My mom messaged me a few times, expressing hope I was fine and that she loved me, but she believed this was for the best, and she mentioned perhaps some separation would aid us all in gaining some clarity on the circumstances. She mentioned the door remained open if I wished to return and apologize to Robert and resolve matters as a family, but I doubt that will ever occur because I'm never going to apologize for desiring to remain in my own residence. Jake's mom inquired if I had any other relatives I could approach for assistance, and I informed her about my dad, but I mentioned I had no means to reach him since he departed when I was 14, and she suggested perhaps it was time to attempt to locate him, because he might be able to aid me or at minimum provide some explanations regarding his departure. I'm uncertain if I wish to do that, because what if he truly did just desert us, as my mom stated? But perhaps it's worth an attempt, since my mom clearly no longer desires my presence. This entire situation is simply wild, and I cannot fathom my mom choosing Robert over her own son, but at least Jake's family is proving genuinely supportive and treating me like an individual instead of some burden they're eager to discard. I intend to continue working and accumulating funds, and hopefully I can discover how to secure my own dwelling shortly, but for the moment, I'm simply thankful to possess a secure place to reside. Update 2. This will likely sound utterly mad, but my dad telephoned me a few days ago, and I haven't received communication from him for several years since his departure when I was 14. I was at Jake's house doing homework when my phone rang, and it was a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered it, a man's voice uttered my name and inquired if it was truly me, and I replied, yes, asking who it was. The voice stated, "This is your father," adding he knew I likely didn't wish to speak with him, but he needed to convey some information I deserved to hear, and I nearly ended the call, suspecting it might be a prank or a scam. But something in the voice resonated as familiar, despite the long interval. He mentioned he understood I likely resented him for departing, and that my mom had probably informed me he had deserted our family, and he stated he didn't fault me for experiencing those emotions, because from my vantage point, that's precisely how it appeared when he vanished without an account. He explained he had been endeavoring to gather the courage to reach out to me for years, but he was unsure if I would desire to hear from him or if my mom would even permit him to speak with me. And he stated he ultimately chose to make contact because he learned through some acquaintances that I was experiencing difficulties at home. I inquired how he was aware of my circumstances, and he replied he still maintained some friendships in our former neighborhood who kept him informed about significant events concerning me and my mom. And one of them had brought up that my mom's new spouse was attempting to force me out of the residence. He stated that upon learning this, he knew he could no longer remain silent because he couldn't allow me to believe he had forsaken me when the reality was far more intricate. Then he revealed something that utterly astonished me and caused me to feel nauseous. And he explained his departure wasn't because he no longer wished to be a father, but rather because my mom had been involved in an affair with Robert for months before he discovered it. He said he returned home early from work one day and discovered Robert and my mom together in their bedroom. And when he confronted my mom about it, she told him she was in love with Robert and wanted a divorce. He said my mom pleaded with him not to reveal what truly happened, because she didn't want me to think badly of her, and she said it would be better for everyone if he just left quietly, and let her tell me that he decided he didn't want to be a family man anymore. He said he was so pained and angry that he agreed to go along with her story, because he thought perhaps it would be simpler for me to see him as the villain, rather than know that my mom had ruined our family through infidelity. He said he lamented that choice every single day for the past 5 years, because he knew I probably thought he was a terrible father who just abandoned his son. But he said at that moment, he was so crushed by my mom's betrayal that he wasn't thinking clearly about what was best for me. He said he relocated to a different state and attempted to start anew, but he never stopped thinking about me and wondering how I was doing, and he said he always intended to contact me when I turned 18, but he kept postponing it because he feared I wouldn't want anything to do with him. I didn't know what to say because this completely contradicted everything my mom had told me about why he left, and I questioned him if he was speaking the truth, or if this was simply his way of trying to make himself appear better after abandoning us. He said he grasped why I would question him, and he said he had proof to support his claims if I were prepared to hear it. And he said he had saved emails and text messages from that time period that revealed what truly occurred. He said after he left, my mom and Robert had officially started a relationship almost at once, and they were intending to marry as soon as the divorce was complete. And he said the chronology of their relationship made it clear that they had been involved long before his departure. This suddenly became very clear because I had always found it strange how quickly my mom recovered from my dad's departure and how swiftly she began dating Robert. And now I realized why she appeared so happy and not heartbroken, as one would expect, after their husband deserts them. I understood that Robert was not some knight in shining armor who saved my mom after my dad's exit, but he was in fact the homewrecker who ruined my parents' marriage and then moved in to fill my dad's role. I asked my dad why he never tried to contend for custody or visitation rights, and he said my mom had threatened to complicate matters in court and put me through a bitter custody dispute if he attempted to dispute her for custody. He said she informed him that she would tell everyone, myself included, that he was an abusive spouse and parent, and she said she would ensure I would never wish to see him again, even if the court mandated visitation. He said he was fearful that a custody battle would do me more harm than good, and he said my mom persuaded him that it would be better for me to have a secure home environment with her and Robert, rather than be trapped
in a conflict between my parents. He said he thought perhaps if he withdrew and allowed them to form their family unit, that I would be more content, in a better situation. But he said he recognized now that he made a grave error by not contending for his right to be my father.
He said he had been monitoring my social media remotely, and he could discern my unhappiness. And when he learned of Robert's attempt to expel me, he realized that his strategy to stay away for my own good had utterly failed. He said it was evident that Robert had never truly desired my presence, and had simply endured my presence until he could dispose of me. And he said he couldn't idly observe Robert treat me like some unwelcome burden when I was his son and merited more. I asked him if he wanted to see me, and he said he had been expecting that question because he longed for me daily and desired above all else to reconnect with me. He said he comprehended if I required time to absorb everything he had told me, and he didn't anticipate immediate forgiveness. But he said he wanted me to know that leaving me was the gravest error of his existence, and he would do anything to compensate for the elapsed period. I informed him I was residing with my friend's family because my mom and Robert had expelled me, and he became very upset and said he found it unbelievable my mom was allowing Robert to eject me from my own home after everything that had transpired. He said if he had understood Robert was going to handle me in this manner, he never would have kept his distance, and he said my mom was meant to safeguard me, not prioritize her a fair partner above her own son. He provided me with his Facebook and address, and instructed me to store his number, and said I could phone him whenever I wished to speak. And he said if I was prepared to offer him an opportunity, he would be delighted for me to visit him, and perhaps even reside with him, if that's what I desired. He said he had a house with a spare bedroom, and he would be pleased to assist me with my college education and commencing my life journey. And he said he understood he had much to atone for, but he was prepared to be the father I merited. I'm so perplexed and enraged at this moment, because my entire existence has been a falsehood, and my mom has been deceiving me for 5 years about why my dad left. And now I discover that Robert was never the benevolent figure who rescued our family unit, but was in fact the individual who shattered it initially. Jake's parents have been very encouraging, and they said they think I should certainly speak with my dad and listen to his version of events. And they said it appears my mom has been influencing me for years to conceal her own errors. They said it is understandable why Robert has always treated me like an unwelcome burden, because I was a reminder of the family he helped destroy. And they said my dad merits an opportunity to clarify his position and compensate for the lost time. I think I'm going to phone my dad again and schedule a meeting with him because I need to know the complete truth about what happened. And perhaps he can help me determine my next steps. I don't know if I can ever forgive my mom for deceiving me for all these years and choosing Robert over me, but at least now I know the real reason why my family disintegrated, and it wasn't because my dad didn't love me. Final update, I convened with my dad 2 weeks ago, and we passed the entire day conversing about what occurred 5 years ago, and how my life had unfolded since he left. And it was deeply emotional because I could tell he sincerely regretted leaving me and felt awful about having missed so much of my life. He showed me all the proof he possessed about my mom's relationship with Robert, including screenshots of text messages where my mom was expressing her love for Robert and her eagerness to commence their new life together. And there were also communications between my mom and Robert, dating from before my dad's departure, discussing the necessity of discretion to avoid detection until they could ascertain the optimal approach to manage the circumstance. The most startling revelation was a text message from my mom to Robert, right after my dad moved out, where she said she was glad they could finally be together without being clandestine. And she said she thought I would adapt rapidly to having Robert as my new paternal figure. There was another communication where Robert informed my mom that he was uncertain about assuming the responsibility of raising another man's child, and my mom reassured him that I was a well-behaved child who wouldn't present any difficulties, and that eventually I would regard Robert as my true father. It was so peculiar reading these communications and seeing how they had orchestrated this entire scheme while I was just a 14-year-old child who was unaware of the true events unfolding for my family. And it made me understand that Robert had never truly desired my presence from the start, but had been feigning for my mom's benefit. It's no surprise he had always regarded me as a burden and been seeking pretexts to dismiss me. My dad repeatedly apologized for leaving me with them and said he ought to have contended more vigorously for custody, and he said he had been providing child support throughout this period, even though my mom told me he never remitted any funds to assist my support. He said my mom had been depositing the checks and utilizing the funds without ever informing me of its origin, and he presented me with bank statements demonstrating he had dispatched more than $40,000 in child support over the past 5 years. I couldn't believe my mom had been deceiving me about that as well, and making me believe my dad was an irresponsible parent who didn't care enough to even send money, when in reality he had been supporting me financially the entire time I thought he had deserted us. My dad said he had inquired of my mom multiple times if he could at least send me birthday and Christmas gifts directly, but she said it would be too perplexing for me, and that it was preferable if I believed the presents originated from her and Robert, so I could have a typical family experience. Then my dad disclosed something I wasn't anticipating, and that has rendered this entire circumstance even more astonishing, and he said when his own father passed away 3 years ago, he inherited a significant trust fund that he had been intending to allocate for my college education and future expenditures. He said the trust fund amounted to approximately $300,000, and he had been awaiting my 18th birthday to contact me so he could begin assisting me financially and compensating for all the years he had missed. He said he had already consulted with a lawyer about establishing an education fund for me and ensuring I would have funds for college and commencing my life. And he said he wanted to purchase me a car and assist me in securing my own apartment, if that's what I desired. He said money couldn't compensate for the time we had forfeited, but he wanted to ensure I had every opportunity to succeed and that I wouldn't ever have to worry about financial strain as I worked to build my future. I was naturally astonished by this news, as I'd been worrying about funds and how I'd cover college and living costs, when unexpectedly my dad told me he could assist with all that and more. He mentioned he'd already begun the paperwork to move some of the money into an account for me, and that once everything was complete, I'd have access to funds for my studies and daily living. Parents about meeting my dad and the trust fund cash since they'd been so supportive, and I wished for them to know I'd soon be able to contribute more to household costs. And Jake's mom then said she was pleased for me, yet she cautioned me to be careful who I informed about the money, as sometimes wealth alters how people interact with you. Indeed, it appears she was entirely correct, as somehow news reached my mom and Robert regarding the trust fund. And I'm fairly certain Jake must have spoken of it to someone at college who knew folks in my old neighborhood, since that's the sole way I can imagine the information returning to them. I don't fault Jake, as he was likely just thrilled for me and didn't consider how the news could circulate. In any case, my mom called me for the first time since I moved out, and she was suddenly seeming very concerned about my well-being, saying she missed me and wished to resolve things, and she added that she had been thinking about our last disagreement, and understood that perhaps Robert had been too strict regarding the moving out deadline. She expressed her love for me and didn't want our family to be divided over what she termed a simple disagreement concerning household rules, and she suggested that perhaps we could all sit down and have a mature conversation about how to make the living arrangement suitable for everyone. I inquired what was different, and she replied she had been speaking with some friends and family members who helped her understand that expelling your son was too extreme and that there had to be a more effective solution. Then Robert joined the call and began apologizing for being overly strict about the house rules, and he mentioned he had been experiencing a lot of stress at work and had been unjustly taking it out on me. He stated he understood that I was still young and attempting to navigate my life, and that perhaps he had been anticipating too much too soon. And he added that he would be prepared to let me move back home without any rent or timeline requirements if I was interested in offering our family another opportunity. This was utterly absurd because only a month prior, Robert had been labeling me an ungrateful brat and asserting I was rude and that he was finished coping with my attitude. Yet now he was behaving as if he cared for my well-being and wished for me to return home. He stated he understood we had started poorly, but was prepared to begin anew and attempt to forge a better relationship, and he admitted he might have been mistaken to treat me like a renter rather than a son. My mom continued to express how much she missed my presence around the house, and how silent and somber it had felt without me. And she mentioned Robert had been experiencing remorse over how things concluded, and they both desired to rectify it. She claimed family was paramount, and she didn't want some miscommunication to separate us indefinitely. And she assured me they were both dedicated to ensuring I felt welcome and cherished in our home. The timing of this abrupt shift in attitude was so transparent that it would have been amusing if it weren't so pitiable, as they plainly discovered my dad's trust fund and understood I wouldn't be some impoverished teenager they could boss around any longer. It was apparent they were attempting to regain my favor, now that they knew I had funds, and they likely presumed they could persuade me to assist with household costs, or perhaps even gain access to some of the trust fund money themselves. I informed my mom I would consider their proposal, but I was quite content residing with Jake's family for the time being, and she responded that she understood, yet hoped I wouldn't delay too long in returning home, as she was concerned about my living arrangements with individuals who weren't truly family. She stated Jake's parents were pleasant, but they lacked the same affection for me as she did, and eventually they might grow weary of an additional person in their home. And she added that my true family would invariably support me, regardless of circumstances. Robert rejoined the call and mentioned he had been contemplating methods to assist me with my college education and future aspirations, and he suggested perhaps we could collaborate to ensure I possessed all necessary resources for success. He claimed he had a degree of expertise in financial planning and investments, and would be glad to aid me in making prudent choices with any funds I might gain access to. And he stated family members ought to remain united and support one another during significant life changes. I nearly burst into laughter given how obvious their actions were and their lack of even attempting subtlety. But I simply stated I valued their concern and would certainly weigh their proposition to return home. After I ended the call, I phoned my dad and recounted the conversation, and he was revolted but unsurprised, and he remarked that my mom had consistently been skilled at manipulating circumstances to her benefit, and Robert likely devised the strategy to attempt to regain my favor. He said they were likely hoping to persuade me to return home and then slowly begin requesting financial assistance with household costs or other matters. And he added that I ought to be extremely cautious about trusting them now that they were aware I possessed funds. I'm absolutely not moving back with my mom and Robert because I can discern the truth behind their insincere apologies and abrupt concern for my welfare, and I believe it's actually beneficial this occurred, as now I understand precisely what sort of individuals they are. They were quite content to expel me when they believed I was merely a burden, lacking funds and alternatives, but immediately upon discovering I had access to a trust fund, they began behaving like affectionate family members who only desired my best interests. My dad has been wonderful throughout this whole ordeal, and he's assisting me in finding my own apartment close to my community college, allowing me to have my own area and autonomy without needing to depend on others, and he assured me will ensure the trust fund is structured so my mom and Robert can never obtain any of the money. He said he's learned his lesson regarding trusting my mom, and he won't allow her to exploit the situation for her benefit ever again. I'm genuinely thankful that things unfolded as they did, because if my dad hadn't reached out, I never would have discovered the truth behind his departure. And if Robert hadn't attempted to evict me, I never would have realized how little my mom genuinely cared for my welfare when it clashed with Robert's desires. Now I understand who truly prioritizes my best interests, and I can begin cultivating a genuine relationship with my dad while maintaining my separation from my mom and Robert until they demonstrate they can be relied upon once more. Next story. My husband Terry and I have been married for 3 years, and we have a 6-month-old baby girl named Maria. Terry's younger brother Ryan is 26, and he's been coming over to our house almost every other day for the past 2 months. It's getting strange because he only appears when Terry's at work. Terry works construction, and he leaves the house at 6 in the morning, not getting back until around 5:30 in the evening. That's precisely when Ryan chooses to visit. Ryan will text me around 7 in the morning, asking if I need assistance with anything around the house, or if I'd like company while Terry is away. Initially, I thought it was thoughtful that he wanted to help his brother's wife, but now I'm starting to suspect there's something more happening. Ryan always brings coffee from this expensive cafe, and he'll sit on our couch for hours, chatting about various things like how his job at the insurance company is dull, and how he wishes he had what Terry and I possess. He consistently makes remarks about how fortunate Terry is to have me and how I'm such a great mom and wife. Last week he brought me flowers simply because he mentioned I looked tired and required something to brighten my spirits. When I told Terry about it, he just chuckled and said, "Ryan has always been considerate in that way. The aspect that truly bothers me is how Ryan behaves when he's here compared to when Terry is present. It's as if he's two distinct individuals. When Terry is home, Ryan hardly speaks to me. He'll watch TV with Terry, or they'll work on Terry's truck in the garage. But when it's just me and Maria, he becomes very talkative and helpful. He consistently finds excuses to be near me, like when I'm cooking, he'll stand directly behind me to see what I'm making. Or when I'm folding laundry, he'll offer to assist, and our hands might touch as we both reach for the same shirt. 2 weeks ago, Maria was crying, and I was having a tough time getting her to settle down. Ryan offered to hold her while I took a shower, and I was so weary that I agreed. But the entire time I was in the bathroom, I felt uneasy and couldn't unwind. Upon exiting, Ryan was sitting in the nursery, holding Maria and singing to her. He glanced up at me and remarked that I looked beautiful with my hair wet and that Terry was the luckiest man alive. I just felt so uncomfortable that I took Maria back and fabricated an excuse about needing to feed her. Yesterday was the most unsettling day yet. Ryan arrived at 8 in the morning carrying pastries from the bakery. He said he had taken the day off work simply to assist me around the house. I told him I didn't need help, but he persisted in staying. He continued to follow me from room to room, and when I was changing Maria's diaper, he stood in the doorway, observing and making remarks about how adept I am with her and how naturally motherhood suits me. It felt so unsettling. Then Ryan asked if he could take a picture of me and Maria together, because he said we looked so peaceful and happy. I told him no, but he kept pushing and saying it would be a nice surprise for Terry, and I had to raise my voice and tell him to stop before he finally backed off. After that, he became quiet and sulky, and he left around noon, but not before telling me he was just trying to be a good brother, and that he didn't understand why I was being so cold to him. When Terry got home, I tried to explain what happened, but he just said, Ryan has always been awkward around people and that he's probably just lonely since his girlfriend broke up with him 6 months ago. Terry said I should be grateful that Ryan cares about our family and wants to help, and that a lot of wives would love to have such a supportive brother-in-law. I felt like I was going crazy because Terry wasn't hearing what I was actually saying. This morning, Ryan texted me again asking if he could come over, and I finally snapped and told him to stop coming by when Terry isn't home because it makes me uncomfortable, and that if he wants to visit, he should wait until Terry gets back from work. Ryan immediately called me and started yelling about how I'm being ridiculous and paranoid, and that he's never done anything inappropriate, and that I'm ruining his relationship with his brother by being suspicious for no reason. Ryan stated I'm probably just hormonal from having the baby, and that I'm imagining things that aren't there, and that Terry is going to be pissed when he finds out I'm trying to keep his brother away from their family. Then Ryan ended our call, and 20 minutes later, Terry called me from work, asking why Ryan was upset, and saying I hurt his feelings by accusing him of something he didn't do. Terry said I need to apologize to Ryan and that I'm being unfair, because Ryan has never been anything but nice to me and helpful around the house, and that I should appreciate having someone who cares about me and Maria when he's not around to help. Terry told me to call Ryan and smooth things over, and that he doesn't want this to become a big family drama, and I just hung up because I was so frustrated that my own husband wasn't listening to me. Now Terry's mom has been phoning me asking what happened between me and Ryan, because apparently Ryan called her crying about how I'm treating him badly, and she wants to know why I'm being mean to him when he's just trying to be a good uncle. I haven't answered her calls because I don't know what to say, and I feel like everyone thinks I'm crazy, but I know something isn't right about Ryan's behavior, and I trust my instincts about this. So am I the asshole for telling Ryan to stop visiting when Terry isn't home? Or am I right to feel uncomfortable about his frequent visits and odd behavior? Update 1. It's been a week since I posted, and things have gotten so much worse with Terry's family. I don't know what to do anymore because everyone is acting like I'm some kind of villain for not wanting Ryan around when I'm alone. Terry came home from work the day I told Ryan not to visit anymore, and he was already angry before he even walked through the door, because apparently Ryan had called him multiple times during his lunch break, crying about how I was being cruel to him for no reason. Terry said his whole crew heard Ryan on the phone, and now they're all asking Terry what's wrong with his wife that she won't let his brother visit his own niece, and it was embarrassing for him at work. Terry sat me down and told me I need to explain exactly what Ryan did that was so inappropriate, because he couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal out of Ryan being friendly and helpful. I tried to tell Terry about all the weird comments Ryan makes and how he only comes over when Terry is at work and how uncomfortable it makes me feel, but Terry just kept interrupting me and saying those things aren't actually bad and that I'm reading too much into normal behavior. Terry said Ryan has always been socially awkward and that he doesn't know how to talk to women properly, but that doesn't mean he has bad intentions, and that I should give him the benefit of the doubt because he's family. Terry told me that Ryan's girlfriend dumped him because she said he was too clingy and needy, and now Ryan is depressed and lonely and just wants to feel like he belongs somewhere, and I'm making him feel unwelcome in his own brother's house. Then Terry said the thing that really made me angry, which was that maybe I'm feeling paranoid because I'm tired from taking care of Maria, and that new mothers sometimes imagine threats that aren't there, and that I should talk to my doctor about postpartum anxiety. I told Terry I'm not paranoid or anxious and that my feelings about Ryan are valid, but Terry just shook his head and said I'm not being rational about this situation. The next day, Terry's mom, Susan, called me, and she was not happy at all. She started lecturing me about how Ryan has always been a sensitive boy, and that he's been having a hard time lately, and that I should be more understanding instead of pushing him away. Susan said Ryan came over to her house in tears because he feels like I hate him, and he doesn't understand what he did wrong, and she wants me to apologize to him and make things right. Then Susan really laid into me and said that maybe I'm not used to having a close family, because my parents live across the country and I don't have siblings, so I don't understand how family relationships work, but that doesn't give me the right to hurt Ryan's feelings and cause problems between the brothers. Susan said if I keep acting like this, I'm going to destroy Terry's relationship with his brother, and that would be unforgivable because family is the most important thing. I tried to explain to Susan that I'm not trying to hurt anyone, but that Ryan's behavior makes me uncomfortable and I have the right to set boundaries in my own home. But Susan just talked over me and said I'm being dramatic and oversensitive. Susan told me she raised her boys to be respectful and helpful, and that I should be ashamed of myself for thinking bad thoughts about Ryan when he's just trying to be nice. Terry's dad called me later, and he was much calmer than Susan, but he still basically told me the same thing, which is that I need to give Ryan another chance and stop making assumptions about his intentions. Terry's dad said Ryan has always been the baby of the family, and maybe he doesn't realize his behavior could be misinterpreted, but that I should talk to him directly instead of just cutting him off completely. The worst part is that Terry is now completely on his family's side, and he's acting like I'm the one causing all the drama by refusing to apologize to Ryan and smooth things over. Terry stated his family believes I'm stuck up and ungrateful, and that I'm trying to control who he can have relationships with, saying that's not fair to him or his brother. Terry informed me that if I don't fix this situation with Ryan, he's going to invite Ryan over whenever he wishes, whether I like it or not, because it's his house too, and Ryan is his brother, and I don't get to decide who's welcome in our home. He mentioned I'm being unreasonable and paranoid, and that he's tired of dealing with this needless drama that I created for no good reason. Ryan has been messaging me daily, asking when he can come over again, and saying he misses spending time with Maria, and that he just wants things to go back to normal between us. He keeps stating he's sorry if he made me uncomfortable, but that he doesn't know what he did wrong, and that he hopes we can work things out because family's important, and he doesn't want there to be bad feelings. I feel so isolated in this because everyone believes I'm wrong, and no one is listening to what I'm actually conveying about how Ryan's behavior makes me feel. Terry is hardly talking to me except to tell me I need to apologize, and his family is treating me like I'm some kind of monster for not wanting Ryan around when I'm by myself with a baby. I know I'm not mistaken about this, and my instincts are telling me something is off about Ryan, but I don't know how to make anyone believe me when they're all convinced that I'm just being paranoid and mean for no reason. Update 2. Something really bad occurred yesterday, and I'm unsure what to do because everyone already thinks I'm crazy and paranoid regarding Ryan. But now I have proof that I was right all along, and I'm terrified about what's going to happen when I tell Terry. After all the pressure from Terry and his family, I finally agreed to let Ryan visit again, because Terry said if I didn't make peace with his brother, he was going to start inviting Ryan over whether I wanted him there or not, and I didn't want to keep fighting about it when everyone was against me. Terry said Ryan promised to be more careful about how he acts around me, and that I should give him another chance to prove he's just trying to be a good brother-in-law. So yesterday morning, Terry left for work at 6, as always, and around 8:30, Ryan texted asking if he could come over to apologize personally for making me uncomfortable, and to show me that he can be normal and respectful. I really didn't want him to come, but I knew Terry would be angry if I refused again. So I told Ryan he could visit for 1 hour, and that was it. Ryan showed up at 9 with coffee and muffins, as he always does, and at first he was acting more normal than usual and keeping his distance, and just making small talk about the weather and asking how Maria was sleeping. I thought maybe everyone was right, and that Ryan had just been awkward before, but now he understood boundaries, and things would be better. Maria was having her morning nap in her crib, and I was sitting on the couch folding laundry while Ryan sat in the armchair across from me, talking about his job and how he's thinking about looking for something new because insurance is boring. Ryan seemed calmer than usual, and he wasn't making weird comments about me or Terry or our marriage, and I started to relax a little bit, thinking maybe I'd been wrong about his intentions. But then Maria woke up and started crying, and I went to get her from the nursery. When I came back into the living room with her, Ryan's whole attitude changed, and he got that same look in his eyes that always made me uncomfortable. Ryan started talking about how beautiful Maria is, and how lucky Terry is to have such a perfect family, and how he wishes he could have what we have. And I could feel my anxiety coming back. I was standing by the window, trying to get Maria to stop fussing, and Ryan got up from his chair and came over to us, saying he wanted to help calm her down. I told him I had it handled, but Ryan moved closer and reached out to touch Maria's cheek. His hand brushed against mine, and he didn't pull away like he should have. Instead, he just stood there way too close to me. Then Ryan started saying how good I smell, and how Terry doesn't appreciate how lucky he is, and how I deserve someone who notices all the little things I do and pays attention to me the way I should be appreciated. I told Ryan to step back and give me some room, but he just kept speaking, saying how he's always believed I was amazing and how he wished things were different. I tried to pull away from Ryan, but he gently grasped my arm and stated he needed to tell me something significant, and that he's been wanting to say it for months, but never found the courage. Ryan mentioned he knows it's wrong, but he can't help the way he feels about me, and that every time he sees me with Maria, he wishes he were the one returning home to us every night instead of Terry. I told Ryan he needed to depart immediately, and that what he was saying was entirely inappropriate. But Ryan claimed he knows I feel something too, because of the way I look at him sometimes, and that he can tell I'm not happy in my marriage, because Terry doesn't give me enough attention. I was clutching Maria tighter and attempting to reach the front door, but Ryan obstructed my path and stated he just needed me to listen to what he was saying. Ryan continued to talk about how he's loved me since the day Terry first brought me home, and how he's always wondered what would have occurred if he had met me first, and how he thinks about me constantly when he's at work or lying in bed at night. I was getting truly scared because Ryan was becoming more emotional and agitated, and I realized I needed to retrieve my phone and record what was happening, in case no one believed me again. I managed to pull my phone from my pocket without Ryan noticing, and I started recording while he persisted in talking about his feelings for me and how he believes we could be happy together if I would only offer him a chance. Ryan stated Terry undervalues me, and that he would adore me as I merit, and that he could be a superior father to Maria compared to Terry. Then Ryan said the most disturbing thing, which was that he's been visiting when Terry is at work because he wanted to spend time with me alone and determine if I shared his feelings, and that all those instances he brought me coffee and flowers and assisted with chores, he was attempting to demonstrate his deep affection for me. Ryan said he thought I was beginning to feel more receptive towards him, and that maybe I was starting to perceive him as more than merely Terry's brother. I told Ryan again that he had to depart, and that I would contact the police or Terry, but Ryan claimed he hadn't finished speaking, and that he required me to comprehend his emotions before he lost his nerve. I was terrified because I was pinned against the wall, holding Maria in my arms. Then Ryan said he's long been dreaming of kissing me for years, and that he couldn't cease contemplating what it would feel like, and before I could respond, he placed his hands on my face and attempted to kiss me on the mouth. I shoved Ryan away with my available hand and told him I was contacting the police if he didn't depart immediately, and finally he retreated and grasped the gravity of his actions. Ryan began apologizing, saying he hadn't intended to frighten me, and that he simply became overwhelmed because his emotions are so intense, and that he would never harm me or Maria. Ryan repeatedly stated that he was sorry, and that he understood it was wrong, but that he couldn't control himself, and that he'd been suppressing these emotions for so long that he just lost control. Ryan implored me not to inform Terry, because it would ruin their relationship, and that he vowed it would never recur, and that he'd keep his distance if that's what I desired. I told Ryan to leave my home and never return, and that I intended to tell Terry everything. Ryan began weeping and claiming I would destroy his life, and that Terry would never pardon him, and that the entire family would despise him. Ryan said he understood he made a mistake, but that he loves me, and he believed perhaps I felt something similar, and that he's apologetic for misinterpreting the situation. After Ryan departed, I secured all the doors and ensured all the windows were fastened, and then I sat down on the floor in Maria's nursery and wept while holding her because I was so distraught and frightened. I keep continually replaying the events and reflecting on how much more severe it could have been if I hadn't been cradling Maria, or if Ryan had been more forceful in attempting to kiss me. The recording on my phone is clear, and one can hear everything Ryan expressed about loving me, wanting to be with me, and attempting to kiss me. And I know this serves as proof that I wasn't being paranoid or fabricating things, as everyone claimed I was. However, I'm terrified to present it to Terry, because I'm unsure if he'll trust me even with the evidence, or if he'll discover a means to fault me for encouraging Ryan or not preventing it earlier. I haven't informed Terry about what occurred yet, because he's been working late this week, and when he arrives home, he's weary and merely wishes to have dinner and watch television, and I'm unsure how to introduce something this grave. I'm somewhat concerned that Terry will believe I somehow encouraged Ryan, or that I ought to have foreseen this and prevented its occurrence. I also am uncertain what impact this will have on Terry's relationship with his family, because if I inform him what Ryan did, then Terry will have to decide between trusting me and supporting his brother, and I'm apprehensive about what will transpire if Terry's family presumes I'm fabricating or inventing it for attention, even with the recording. Final update, I at last told Terry everything and let him hear the recording, and I'm immensely relieved that he finally believes me and understands Ryan's true nature rather than excusing his conduct, as he'd been doing for months. I held off until Saturday morning when Terry was off work and Maria was napping, allowing us to speak without interruption. I seated him at the kitchen table and informed him I had something quite serious to present. Terry could discern from my expression that something was gravely amiss, and he inquired if anyone had passed away, or if Maria was unwell. I replied no, but explained that what I needed to convey would alter everything between us and his family. I began by recalling for Terry how I'd been informing him for weeks that Ryan's conduct was improper and caused me unease, and how Terry and his entire family continually told me I was being overly suspicious and irrational. Terry attempted to interject and suggest we didn't need to revisit all that, but I insisted he needed to hear everything I had to tell him before replying. Next, I informed Terry that Ryan had visited on Thursday, and that an incident occurred that confirmed my suspicions about Ryan's improper feelings for me. Terry's expression grew very serious, and he asked what Ryan had done. I retrieved my phone and informed Terry I had captured the events, stating he had to hear it personally, as I was certain he wouldn't credit my account if I merely recounted Ryan's words. I played the recording from the start, where Ryan discusses how he's always loved me, wishes he'd met me first, and thinks about me constantly. Terry's face became utterly pale and his hands began to tremble. When the recording reached the part where Ryan stated he'd been coming over to spend time with me alone and see if I felt the same, Terry rose from the table and began pacing the kitchen. I could see he was growing very angry. The most difficult moment was when Ryan's voice on the recording mentioned he'd been dreaming about kissing me, and then you can hear me telling him to get off me and him saying, "Please, just once." Terry punched the wall so forcefully that he created a hole in the drywall and started shouting about how he was going to kill his brother for touching me. Terry was enraged and kept saying he couldn't believe Ryan would do such a thing, and that he felt ill thinking about all the times he defended Ryan and told me I was overreacting, when Ryan was actually plotting to assault me in our home. Terry said he was sorry for not listening to me, and that he should have trusted my instincts instead of dismissing my worries and making me feel insane. Then Terry called Ryan right there in front of me, and when Ryan answered, Terry began screaming at him about what he did to me, calling him a disgusting pervert and saying he never wanted to see him again. I could hear Ryan attempting to interrupt and offer excuses, but Terry simply continued yelling that Ryan was dead to him, and that if he ever approached me or Maria again, Terry would ensure he regretted it. Terry informed Ryan that he had listened to the recording of everything Ryan said and did, and that there was no way to deny or rationalize it, adding that Ryan was sick for attempting to assault his brother's wife while she was holding their baby. Ryan appeared puzzled by the recording, and then Terry declared that Ryan had ruined their relationship permanently, stating he never wanted Ryan to contact any of us again. He then hung up and hurled his phone across the room. Once Terry had settled down somewhat, he embraced me and apologized repeatedly for not trusting me and for leaving me to cope with Ryan's harassment alone for such an extended period. Terry expressed that he felt awful that I had been frightened and uneasy in our own home while he was at work, and that he should have safeguarded me instead of defending Ryan and making me feel as though I was the issue. Terry inquired if Ryan had ever touched me previously or uttered inappropriate remarks when I lacked evidence, and I recounted all the instances Ryan stood too near me or made observations about how fortunate Terry was, and how Ryan consistently found pretexts to touch my hand or stand behind me in the kitchen. Terry became angry once more and stated he couldn't grasp how he had been so oblivious to the events unfolding. Subsequently, Terry's phone began to ring, and it was his mother, Susan, calling. Terry answered and promptly began informing her of Ryan's actions, stating they would never again see or speak to Ryan. I could hear Susan becoming distressed and attempting to defend Ryan, suggesting there must be some misunderstanding. But Terry informed her he possessed proof and that Ryan had confessed everything on the recording. Susan began to cry, pleading with Terry not to remove Ryan from the family, asserting that Ryan must be unwell or experiencing a breakdown, and that they ought to seek help for him instead of forsaking him. Terry told Susan that Ryan made his decision when he chose to assault me, and that he no longer cares what transpires with Ryan, because safeguarding me and Maria is more crucial than Ryan's feelings or issues. Terry informed Susan that if she or anyone else in the family attempts to defend Ryan or reach out to us regarding giving him another opportunity, then they too would be estranged, as he will not permit anyone to make me feel insecure or uneasy ever again. Susan persisted in trying to argue, but Terry terminated the call with her and deactivated his phone so she could not call back. Throughout the weekend, Terry's dad and sister Emily both attempted to call and text, but Terry disregarded all of them and told me he wishes not to hear anything they have to say, unless it is to apologize to me for disbelieving me and endorsing Ryan, instead of shielding me from his improper conduct. Terry said he's ashamed that his family mistreated me so poorly and caused me to feel mistaken for relying on my intuition about Ryan, and that he's going to ensure they all understand precisely what Ryan did, so they can't act as if it wasn't so grave, or that I was exaggerating. Yesterday, Terry replaced all the door locks on our house and put in a surveillance camera by the front door should Ryan attempt to visit when Terry isn't home. And he also spoke with our neighbor, requesting her to call the police if she spots Ryan close to our home. Terry said he's taking no risks with my and Maria's security, and that Ryan forfeited his place in our family when he attempted to assault me. I'm greatly relieved that Terry at last understands the truth and credits my account, and is prioritizing me and Maria instead of endeavoring to maintain harmony with his family as he had been doing previously. Terry continues to apologize for not heeding me earlier and for allowing Ryan to make me feel insecure. But I told him what counts is that he trusts me now and is safeguarding us from Ryan. We have not received any communication from Ryan since Terry challenged him, but Terry said should Ryan attempt to reach me or appear at the residence, he's going to instantly notify the police and apply for a protective order. I feel like a tremendous burden has been removed from my mind now that Terry understands the true events, and I no longer need to feign that Ryan's conduct was ordinary, or that I was being overly suspicious of his motives. I'm still absorbing all that occurred, and I'll likely speak with someone regarding it beyond Reddit. Let's move on to the next story. My wife and I adopted our son before she passed away. Jacob was 4 then, and he's 10 now. His birth parents lost custody due to neglect and abuse, and after 2 years in the foster system, I was fortunate enough to become his father. Jacob is the greatest thing that has ever happened to me, and I love him more than anything on earth. My sister Isabel will be getting married next month, and I agreed to assist with wedding costs since both she and her fiancé are teachers and don't earn a lot. We're talking about $15,000 from my side alone here, a significant sum for me, but I wanted to help family. Isabel appeared very thankful and consistently mentioned to everyone how generous I was, stating she couldn't manage it without me. Last weekend, Isabel had her bachelorette party, and she invited me to the dinner portion before they proceeded to the bars. I took Jacob along because my babysitter canceled at the last moment, and Isabel assured me it would be acceptable since it was merely dinner at a pleasant restaurant. Jacob is very well behaved and courteous. He simply sat there eating his pasta and disturbed no one. Isabel had been drinking throughout dinner, and she began speaking about her excitement to start her own family soon. A friend of hers asked if she wanted children right away, and Isabel responded, yes, she desired true kids, not like phony adopted ones that carry burdens and difficulties. I attempted to remain composed and inquired what she implied by that. Isabel looked directly at Jacob and stated that adopted children are merely damaged goods, and that true parents who give birth to their own kids possess a unique bond that can never be duplicated with some piece of trash you collect from the sidewalk. She mentioned that's why she would never adopt, because you never know what sort of mental issues and poor genetics you'll be saddled with. Jacob heard everything. He pushed his chair back and hurried to the restroom. I noticed other people at nearby tables staring at us because Isabel had been speaking quite loudly. Her friends appeared uneasy, and one of them told Isabel that was really harsh. Isabel just shrugged and claimed she was being honest, and that people needed to stop pretending adoption is the same as having your own children. I got up and followed Jacob to the restroom, where I found him crying in one of the stalls. I told him that Isabel was wrong and intoxicated, and that he is my real son whom I love completely. Jacob said he wanted to go home and asked why Isabel hated him so much. I had to tell him that some people say stupid things when they drink, but I was seething internally. I returned to the table, and Isabel was still talking about how she believes adoption is just people attempting to play house with someone else's broken kids. I told her we were leaving, and that what she said was repulsive. Isabel rolled her eyes and claimed I was being overly sensitive, and that Jacob probably couldn't even comprehend what she was saying anyway, because foster children typically have learning disabilities. I exited that restaurant and drove Jacob home in total silence. He didn't utter a word the entire trip, but I could tell he was still distressed. When we arrived home, he went straight to his room, and I could hear him crying through the door. I sat outside his room for several minutes, just listening to my son weep because of what my sister had said about him. The next morning, I phoned Isabel and informed her I was no longer paying for her wedding. Isabel began screaming at me over the phone, saying I was ruining her life over nothing, and that she was merely being truthful about adoption. I told her that calling my son trash was not nothing, and that she clearly doesn't respect me or my family. Isabel said that Jacob isn't genuinely my family, and that I need to stop pretending like adoption makes someone a real parent. I hung up on her and blocked her number. Then I contacted the wedding venue and revoked my credit card authorization for the remaining payments. Isabel had already placed deposits using my card for the flowers, catering, and photographer, so she's now responsible for approximately $20,000 in total expenses. Isabel appeared at my house that same evening with our parents and our brother. They all began yelling at me, claiming I was destroying Isabel's wedding over a misunderstanding. My mom stated that Isabel was simply expressing her personal feelings about adoption and that I shouldn't take it so personally. My dad said that Isabel has been planning this wedding for 2 years and that I'm being cruel to withdraw my support over some words. I told them exactly what Isabel said about Jacob and how she called him trash and damaged goods. My mom said that Isabel was likely just nervous about becoming a mother herself and didn't mean it the way it sounded. My brother said that Isabel has always been supportive of my adoption and that she must have been truly intoxicated to say something like that. Isabel stood there the entire time and never once apologized or admitted she was wrong. She just kept saying that I was overreacting and that she never intended to hurt Jacob's feelings. She said she still believes adoption is different from having biological children, but that doesn't mean she doesn't care about Jacob. I told them all to leave my house and that Isabel's wedding was her problem now. My dad said I was being stubborn and that families should stick together no matter what. I responded that Isabel should have considered that before she chose to insult my son in public. Jacob came downstairs during all this yelling and heard Isabel say that she didn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal about her opinion on adoption. Jacob looked at Isabel and asked her why she thinks he's trash. Isabel appeared uneasy and claimed she never specifically called him trash. Jacob insisted she did, adding he heard her say he was picked up from the pavement like garbage. Isabel grew angry and told Jacob he was being dramatic, and that he needed to understand that not everyone would sugarcoat things for him in the real world. She stated that adopted children must develop thick skin because people would hold opinions about their situation their entire lives. I completely lost my temper and began shouting at Isabel that she had no right to speak to my son like that in my own home. I told her to fuck off and never come back. My parents attempted to calm everyone, but I was done hearing any of them defend Isabel's conduct. After they departed, Jacob asked me if what Isabel said was accurate about adopted children being different and damaged. I spent the remainder of the night explaining to him that Isabel was utterly mistaken and that there's nothing different or wrong with being adopted. I told him that I chose him specifically because I desired him to be my son, and that makes our bond even more special than families, who merely happen to share DNA. Now my entire family is calling me incessantly, attempting to persuade me to alter my decision about the wedding payment. Isabel's wedding is in 3 weeks, and she's frantically searching for ways to cover all expenses. I don't care if Isabel has to cancel her wedding. She made her decision when she chose to label my son trash in front of a restaurant full of patrons. I won't fund a wedding for someone who believes my child is flawed merchandise I collected from the pavement. I've put in too much effort building Jacob's confidence and feeling of security to allow my sister to demolish it with her harsh remarks. Isabel made it evident that she doesn't view Jacob as her genuine nephew, and that she thinks I'm merely pretending to be a family with flawed individuals. That's not a person I wish to have in my life or my son's life. The funds aren't truly the problem here. It's the principle of the matter. I refuse to financially back someone who shows such minimal regard for my family. Isabel can determine how to cover her own wedding expenses as most adults do, rather than expecting her brother to fund her special day after she disparages his child. So, IDA for not paying for my sister's wedding? Update 1. A week has passed since I shared the story about my sister Isabel calling my adopted son Jacob trash at her bachelorette party and my subsequent withdrawal of financial support for her wedding. The situation has significantly deteriorated, and my family is entirely distraught over Isabel's wedding being in just 3 weeks. My parents, brother, and sister have been phoning me repeatedly each day, insisting that I rethink paying for Isabel's wedding. My mother visited yesterday with an entire speech about how family members forgive one another and how I'm acting foolish over something Isabel uttered while intoxicated. She mentioned that Isabel has been crying daily about her wedding potentially being ruined, and that I need to consider how this impacts the entire family. I informed my mom that Isabel hasn't apologized even once and still doesn't believe she did anything wrong. My mom suggested that Isabel is under considerable stress with the wedding and that I should be the more mature person in this situation. She claimed that Isabel loves Jacob and would never deliberately harm him, and that I'm overthinking some thoughtless remarks. However, the truth is, I'm starting to question if Isabel's attitudes are more prevalent in my family than I initially believed. The fact that my parents and brother are so quick to defend her and dismiss what she said makes me think that perhaps they don't fully accept Jacob either. Maybe they all view him as less than a genuine family member, and Isabel was simply the only one intoxicated enough to voice it. I decided I needed to confront Isabel directly about this whole situation, so I called her yesterday morning. Isabel answered the phone crying and immediately started begging me to rethink helping with the wedding. She stated that she'd have to call off everything, and that Alan was talking about putting off the wedding indefinitely because they couldn't pay for it. I informed Isabel that before we discussed any money, she had to apologize to Jacob for her words. Isabel responded that she had already told everyone she didn't mean it the way it sounded, and Jacob should know she cares for him. I replied that she needed to apologize to Jacob personally and recognize that her statement was entirely wrong. Isabel fell silent for a moment and then stated that she felt there had been a misunderstanding about her meaning. She explained that when she mentioned adopted children having baggage and problems, she was speaking generally about the foster system, not about Jacob personally. She added that Jacob is different because he's been with me for 6 years and has adjusted well to our family. I reminded Isabel that she specifically called Jacob trash and stated he was picked up from the sidewalk. Isabel claimed that she was making a point about how society views adoption and that she wasn't expressing her own personal opinion. She insisted that she was attempting to explain why she would choose to have biological children instead of adopting, but that doesn't mean she thinks less of Jacob. This is where Isabel truly revealed her real character, and her bridezilla behavior completely emerged. When I told her that her explanation was bullshit and that she clearly meant what she said, Isabel started shouting at me about how I was ruining her life over a misunderstanding. She claimed that I was being cruel and vindictive, and that I plainly cared more about Jacob than my own sister. Isabel stated that she had been planning this wedding for 2 years, and that I was destroying everything she had worked for because I wanted to play the victim. She insisted that Jacob was fine, and that I was creating drama because I liked the attention of being the wronged party. She added that I had always been jealous of her happiness, and that I was using this situation as an excuse to sabotage her wedding. I informed Isabel that she was revealing her true personality, and that this was precisely why I did not want to support her wedding. Isabel began crying and shouting that I was an awful brother and that I never truly cared about her happiness. She stated that if I truly loved her, I would help her even if I was upset about what she had said. Isabel then uttered something that truly stunned me. She claimed that she believed I had unrealistic expectations about how people ought to treat Jacob, and that I needed to accept that he would always be viewed as different because he was adopted. She added that I couldn't shield him from reality indefinitely, and that people would make remarks about his situation throughout his entire life. I asked Isabel if she was implying that it was acceptable for people to call Jacob trash because he was adopted. Isabel stated that wasn't her intention. She then added that I needed to teach Jacob how to deal with insensitive remarks instead of confronting everyone who says something I disapproved of. She added that Jacob needed to grow thicker skin if he was to survive in the real world. That's when I completely lost my temper and began shouting at Isabel about how she had no right to tell me how to raise my son or what Jacob needed to learn to put up with. I informed her that my duty as his father was to shield him from people like her who believed adopted children were less valuable than biological ones. Isabel began crying more intensely and claimed that I was being unkind and that she never stated Jacob was less valuable. Isabel then attempted a different tactic, beginning to speak about how much she loved Jacob and how she had watched him mature for 6 years. She asserted that she would never deliberately harm him, and that she considered him her true nephew. However, she then stated that she still held the belief that biological families shared a unique bond that adopted families lacked, and that there was nothing wrong with holding that viewpoint. I told Isabel that her opinion was incorrect and damaging, and that she could keep it to herself instead of voicing it at family dinners in front of my son. Isabel stated that she should be able to express her honest feelings without me attacking her, and that I'm being controlling about what people are allowed to think. The discussion concluded with Isabel hanging up on me after she stated that she hoped I was happy about ruining her wedding, and that she'd never forgive me for picking Jacob over her. She claimed that blood family ought to come first, and that I was making a mistake by prioritizing an adopted child over my actual sister. I spoke with Jacob about the phone call because I wanted him to understand that I would always defend him against individuals who attempted to make him feel inferior. Jacob mentioned that he heard Isabel shouting through the phone and inquired what she was saying about him. I informed him that Isabel still didn't grasp why what she had said was wrong, but that her opinions didn't alter how much I loved him or how proud I was to be his father. Jacob suggested that perhaps it would be better if Isabel were no longer part of our family, given that she believed he didn't truly belong anyway. I assured him that Isabel's views were an issue, and that he absolutely belonged in our family, regardless of what anyone else thought. But honestly, I'm beginning to believe that Jacob might be correct about Isabel not being someone we require in our lives. The wedding is in 3 weeks, and Isabel is completely panicking about the financial situation. My mother contacted me this morning, stating that Isabel might need to relocate the wedding to a community center and cancel the photographer and flowers if I don't assist. She mentioned that Isabel's dress has already been altered and paid for, and it's too late to return anything. I informed my mother that Isabel made her decision when she chose to insult Jacob, and then reinforced her remarks instead of apologizing. My mother stated that I was being stubborn, and that this entire situation was harming the whole family. She mentioned that Christmas and other family get-togethers would be ruined due to this disagreement. The wedding can proceed or not, I no longer care. Isabel can figure out how to cover the costs herself, or she can cancel it and blame me to everyone who will listen, what I will no longer do. Isabel can figure out how to cover the costs herself, or she can cancel it and blame me to everyone who will listen. What I will not do is reward someone for calling my son trash by providing them $15,000 for a celebration. Update 2. I need to inform everyone about what transpired with my sister Isabel and her wedding situation, because matters escalated far beyond what I ever anticipated. The wedding was scheduled for this weekend, but Isabel appeared at my house last night, completely intoxicated, and assaulted me. It's been 3 weeks since my previous update, where I discussed confronting Isabel on the phone regarding her remarks toward my adopted son, Jacob. Since then, my family has been exerting immense pressure on me to reconsider helping pay for the wedding. Isabel apparently managed to gather sufficient funds to retain most of the vendors, but she had to implement significant reductions to the reception and forgo the photographer. My parents have been incensed with me about this, and my mom has been sending me guilt-inducing messages daily about how Isabel is devastated and anxious. My dad called me last weekend and mentioned that Isabel has been experiencing anxiety attacks, and that her fiancé Alan is growing exasperated with all the wedding-related turmoil. He stated that if Isabel's relationship disintegrates because of this, I will be to blame. I informed my dad that Isabel brought the situation upon herself when she chose to label Jacob as trash, and then declined to express regret for it. My dad asserted that I was nursing a grievance over something Isabel uttered while intoxicated, and that I needed to pardon her for the sake of familial harmony. He claimed that Isabel had understood her mistake, and that I was acting vengefully by persisting in penalizing her. But Isabel hasn't comprehended anything, and she most certainly hasn't offered an apology to Jacob. She's been informing everyone in our extended family that I'm attempting to sabotage her wedding because I'm envious of her joy. Jacob has been faring better since my last update, but he still continues to inquire about Isabel and the reason for her animosity toward him. Since then, my family has been exerting immense pressure on me to reconsider helping pay for the wedding. Isabel apparently managed to gather sufficient funds to retain most of the vendors, but she had to implement significant reductions to the reception and forego the photographer. My parents have been incensed with me about this, and my mom has been sending me guilt-inducing messages daily about how Isabel is devastated and anxious. My dad called me last weekend and mentioned that Isabel has been experiencing anxiety attacks and that her fiancé, Alan, is growing exasperated with all the wedding-related turmoil. He stated that if Isabel's relationship disintegrates because of this, I will be to blame. I informed my dad that Isabel brought the situation upon herself when she chose to label Jacob as trash and then declined to express regret for it. My dad asserted that I was nursing a grievance over something Isabel uttered while intoxicated, and that I needed to pardon her for the sake of familial harmony. He claimed that Isabel had understood her mistake, and that I was acting vengefully by persisting in penalizing her. But Isabel hasn't comprehended anything, and she most certainly hasn't offered an apology to Jacob. She's been informing everyone in our extended family that I'm attempting to sabotage her wedding because I'm envious of her joy. Jacob has been faring better since my last update, but he still continues to inquire about Isabel and the reason for her animosity toward him. I've been trying to shield him from all the family drama, but it's challenging when my parents keep calling and visiting to argue with me about the wedding. Jacob heard my mom shouting at me last week about how I was ruining Isabel's special day, and he asked me if he was the cause of everyone's dispute. I had to clarify to Jacob again that this conflict was about Isabel's conduct and decisions, not about him. I assured him that some individuals hold mistaken notions about adoption, but that doesn't imply there's anything incorrect with being adopted. Last night, around 9 o'clock, I heard someone banging on my front door and shouting. Jacob was upstairs completing homework, and I went to see who was there. Isabel was standing on my porch completely intoxicated and yelling about how I had ruined her life and destroyed her wedding. She was swaying unsteadily and slurring her words, and I could detect the scent of alcohol from 3 feet away. I opened the door and informed Isabel that she needed to depart because she was inebriated and creating a disturbance. Isabel shoved past me into my house and began shouting about how I was an awful brother and that I had picked some random child over my own blood relatives. She claimed that Jacob wasn't my real son and that I was deluded if I believed adoption made someone a true parent. Isabel was staggering around my living room and knocking items over while she screamed at me. She said that I destroyed her relationship with Alan because he's starting to think that I was right about her being a bad person. She said that Alan has been questioning whether she's ready for marriage, if she can't even maintain relationships with her own family. I told Isabel that she needed to calm down and that we could talk about this when she was sober. Isabel said that there was nothing to talk about, and that I already made my decision to choose Jacob over her. She said that I obviously care more about some foster kid than my own sister, and that she'll never forgive me for ruining the most important day of her life. Jacob came downstairs because Isabel was yelling so loud, and he asked what was happening. When Isabel saw Jacob, she started screaming at him directly and said that this was all his fault for being too sensitive about what people say. She said that Jacob needs to stop acting like a victim every time someone points out that he's not really part of our family. I immediately stepped between Isabel and Jacob and told her to get out of my house right now. Isabel said that she wasn't done talking and that Jacob needed to hear the truth about how the world sees adopted kids. She said that Jacob is going to spend his whole life pretending to belong in families that will never fully accept him, and that he might as well get used to it now. Jacob started crying and ran back upstairs to his room. I was absolutely furious. and told Isabel that she was drunk and disgusting, and that she needed to leave immediately. Isabel said that I couldn't handle the truth about adoption, and that I was living in a fantasy where Jacob was my real son, instead of just some kid I took in out of pity. That's when I completely lost it and started yelling at Isabel about how she was a horrible person and that she had no right to come into my house and attack my son. Isabel screamed back at me that Jacob wasn't my son and that I needed to stop pretending like adoption makes someone a real parent. She said that real families are built on blood and DNA, and that everything else was just people playing house with other people's damaged children. I told Isabel to get out, or I was calling the police. Isabel said that I could call whoever I wanted, but that she wasn't leaving until I agreed to pay for her wedding again and stop destroying her life over Jacob. She said that Jacob had caused enough problems for our family, and that I needed to choose between him and everyone else. Isabel was standing right in front of me, screaming in my face, and I told her one more time to leave my house. That's when Isabel completely snapped and slapped me hard across the face. The slap was so hard that my ear started ringing, and I could taste blood from where my teeth cut the inside of my cheek. I was completely shocked that Isabel had actually hit me, and for a second I just stood there staring at her. Isabel looked shocked too and said that she didn't mean to do that. She said that I made her so angry that she couldn't control herself, and that it was my fault for making her feel cornered. I immediately called the police and told Isabel that she was going to be arrested for assault. Isabel started crying and begging me not to call the cops, and said that she was just drunk and upset about her wedding. She said that hitting me was an accident, and that she would never normally do something like that. The police came about 10 minutes later, and Isabel was still in my living room crying and saying that this was all a misunderstanding. I showed the officers the red mark on my face and told them that Isabel had been drinking and came to my house uninvited and attacked me. Isabel told the police that we were just having a family argument and that she didn't mean to hit me. The officers could smell the alcohol on Isabel, and they asked her how much she had been drinking. Isabel said that she had a few drinks because she was upset about her wedding being postponed, but that she wasn't that drunk. The officers asked if she had driven to my house, and Isabel said yes, so they immediately arrested her for drunk driving in addition to the assault. Isabel started crying harder when they put the handcuffs on her, and she kept saying that I was ruining her life, and that this would destroy her wedding completely. She said that if she's convicted of assault and drunk driving, Alan will certainly leave her, and she'll lose her teaching job. The officers told her she should have considered that before she chose to drink, drive, and assault someone. After the police departed with Isabel, I went upstairs to check on Jacob. He was in his room crying, and he asked me why Isabel hates him so much and why she believes he doesn't belong in our family. I sat with Jacob for over an hour, explaining that Isabel has serious problems and that her views on adoption are wrong and hurtful. I didn't sleep at all last night, as I kept thinking about Isabel coming into my house drunk and attacking both me and Jacob. I realized that Isabel's behavior had escalated far beyond merely making hurtful comments about adoption. She's now willing to come to my home drunk and physically assault me, because I won't give her money for her wedding. This morning my parents called me, screaming about Isabel being arrested and demanding that I drop the charges. My mom said that Isabel's life will be completely destroyed if she's convicted, and that I need to fix this situation. I told my parents that Isabel arrived at my house uninvited, verbally attacked my son, and then physically assaulted me when I told her to leave. I said that Isabel made the choice to drive drunk to my house and hit me, and that I'm not responsible for the consequences of her actions. My parents said that Isabel is family, and that I should be prepared to forgive her, rather than sending her to jail. My mom said that if Isabel is convicted, she'll lose her teaching job, and her relationship with Alan will end. She said that Isabel's entire life will be ruined due to one night when she made poor decisions while drinking. I told my mom that Isabel has been making poor choices for weeks now, and that last night was just the culmination of her refusal to take responsibility for her behavior. My parents are insisting that I contact the prosecutor and request that they drop the charges against Isabel. They said that Isabel has learned her lesson and that she'll never repeat anything like this. I told my parents that I'm finished protecting Isabel from the consequences of her actions and that she needs to confront what she's done. I said that Isabel has revealed exactly who she is, and that I don't want such a person in my life or in Jacob's life. After talking to my parents, I understood that they'll never hold Isabel accountable for her behavior, and that they'll always fault me for not enabling her. They think that Isabel's wedding dress validates her attacking my son and assaulting me, and that I should simply forgive her and move forward. I've decided that I'm going entirely no contact with Isabel, and I'm strongly considering obtaining a restraining order to keep her distant from me and Jacob. Isabel has shown that she's willing to escalate to physical violence when she doesn't get what she wants, and I don't feel safe having her around my son. I'm also limiting my contact with my parents and my brother, because they've made it clear that they prioritize Isabel's feelings over Jacob's safety and well-being. They believe that Isabel's comments about adoption are merely a difference of opinion, and that I should endure having my son called trash, as long as it maintains family peace. The final story for today. 8 years ago, my parents ran a small restaurant that had been in our family for 2 generations, and they always spoke about how one day it would pass down to the next generation and keep the family legacy going. My elder brother Clark was always the favored child, receiving praise for everything he accomplished, while I was perpetually compared to him and told I had to strive harder to meet his standards. When I finished high school, my parents sat me down and informed me I had to begin working at the restaurant at once to learn the business from scratch, stating that Clark would ultimately take over as the primary owner, but I would hold a small stake if I proved myself deserving through the years. I had already gained admission to a good college with a partial scholarship and wished to study computer science, because I was quite skilled with technology and had been teaching myself programming since middle school. My parents stated that college was a waste of funds, and that the restaurant would supply all I required in life, adding that I was being selfish for wishing to abandon the family business that had sustained us for numerous years. Clark had quit community college after 1 semester and had already been working at the restaurant for 3 years, and my parents kept asserting he was a natural at managing the business, handling customers, and overseeing the staff. I told them I wanted to go to college and that I would work part-time at the restaurant during breaks and summers, but that I desired my own career and not just work for my brother for the rest of my life. My dad grew very angry and said I was being ungrateful, adding that Clark deserved to inherit the business because he had shown dedication and loyalty while I was trying to run away from my responsibilities. The arguments went on for weeks and got worse every day, and my parents continually mentioned how much money they had spent raising me and how I owed them for all their sacrifices, stating that working in the family business was the least I could do to pay them back. Clark repeatedly told me I was being stupid and that college would just fill my head with useless ideas, and I would never make as much money as I could make working with the family. My girlfriend at the time supported my decision to go to college, and my parents said she was a bad influence and was turning me against my family. When I refused to change my mind and told them I was going to college, no matter what they said, my parents told me that if I left for college, I shouldn't bother coming back home, and that they would consider me dead to them. I thought they were just trying to scare me and that they would calm down after a few days. But when I came home from my graduation party, they had packed all my stuff in boxes and left them on the front porch. My dad gave me an envelope with $500 and declared that was all I would ever receive from them, stating I was no longer considered their son and was not welcome in their home any longer. I resided with my girlfriend's family for the summer and then began college in the fall, working 2 part-time jobs to cover my expenses that the scholarship didn't fund. My parents blocked my phone number and did not reply to any messages I sent them, and when I attempted to visit during winter break, my dad informed me through the door that I had to depart at once or he would call the police. Clark shared photos on social media of family dinners, holidays, and vacations, always ensuring to caption them with phrases such as family time with the people who matter and grateful for my real family, which felt like he was attempting to rub it in my face. College proved challenging because I was working extensively and lacked any financial aid from my parents. But I earned a degree in computer science and secured a job at a tech company immediately after graduation. I advanced my career over the years and eventually achieved promotion to a senior developer position and then a team lead position, earning substantial income and having purchased my own house and car. I met my current girlfriend, Rose, 3 years ago after a rather difficult breakup from my prior relationship. She's a nurse, and we've been cohabiting for the past year, and she's been sharing photos of our travels, our home, and us at pleasant restaurants on social media. I had learned through a relative that the restaurant was facing difficulties because Clark had developed a gambling issue and had been taking funds from the business to settle his debts, and that my parents were struggling to keep up with the bills and the rent. I didn't truly monitor what was occurring with them because they had made it evident that I was no longer part of their family, and I had established my own life without them. Last month, Rose shared photos from our holiday to Hawaii and tagged me in them, and also posted pictures of the new car I had acquired and the enhancements we had made to our house. 2 weeks after Rose shared those pictures, my parents appeared at my front door on a Saturday morning and began knocking very loudly, calling my name and stating they needed to speak with me. I peered through the peephole and saw both of them standing there. My mom was holding a plate of cookies, and my dad had a bouquet of flowers, and they both appeared older and more weary than I recalled. I did not open the door and informed them through it that they needed to depart my property at once, as they had made it evident 8 years ago that I was no longer their son. My mom began crying, saying they had made a mistake and wished to fix things, that they missed me and wanted me to come home and be part of the family once more. My dad stated they had observed how successful I had become, and how content I looked in the pictures, and that they were proud of me and wished to celebrate my achievements with me. I informed them that it was too late, and that they couldn't simply appear after 8 years and anticipate everything returning to normal, and that they had to depart before I summoned the police. They refused to depart and continued knocking, and my mom kept crying and saying she merely wanted to see her son, and that she had been unhappy for the past 8 years without me. My dad began discussing how the restaurant was in trouble and how they required my help to save it, and how we could all work together as a family to improve the situation. It was then I understood they didn't truly desire my return, because they missed me, but rather because they had observed that I was successful and believed I could resolve their financial problems. I summoned the police and informed them that my parents were on my property and declining to depart after I had requested them repeatedly to leave, and that I desired their immediate removal. The police arrived about 15 minutes later and spoke with my parents, informing them they had to depart and not return unless I extended an invitation. My mom was still crying and pleading with the police officer to allow her to speak with me, and my dad was arguing with the officer, claiming I was their son and they had a right to see me. The police officer informed them that I was an adult and possessed the right to determine who I wished on my property, and that they could face arrest for trespassing if they returned without my consent. The police officer provided me with a report number and advised me to call them again if my parents returned, and that I could apply for a restraining order if the harassment persisted. Update 1. 3 days after the police escorted my parents from my property, Clark and his wife Iris, yes, he got married during the preceding 8 years, and I wasn't even invited to the wedding, appeared at my door in the evening while I was having dinner with Rose. I heard the doorbell chime and noticed through the peephole that it was Clark and Iris. Clark appeared very nervous, continually running his hands through his hair, and Iris stood behind him with her arms folded. I opened the door but left the security chain engaged and inquired what they desired. Clark stated they merely wished to speak with me for a few minutes regarding the situation with our parents. I informed them I did not want to discuss our parents, and that I had clarified my stance when I summoned the police on them, and that they needed to depart. Iris pushed forward and said that our parents were heartbroken and hadn't been eating or sleeping since the police incident, and that they just wanted their son back and couldn't comprehend why I was being so cruel to them. Clark said that our parents had sent them because they believed I might be more inclined to listen to him since we were brothers, and that he wanted to help mend the family. I told them that the family was broken 8 years ago when our parents expelled me, and that I wasn't interested in repairing anything now simply because their business was failing, and they thought I could assist them financially. Clark's face reddened, and he said I was being selfish and that I should help family no matter what had transpired in the past, and that our parents had made mistakes, but were now willing to admit they were wrong. Iris stated that our parents were aging and that I would regret not having a relationship with them once they were gone, and that I was discarding the only family I had over a trivial argument from years ago. I began to close the door, and Clark pushed against it, saying I needed to listen to him and that I owed it to our parents to at least hear them out and offer them an opportunity to apologize properly. I told him to remove his hand from my door and that I didn't owe anyone anything, and that our parents had made their choice. Clark began shouting that I was being a spoiled brat and that I had always considered myself better than everyone else, and that our parents were right to choose him over me because he genuinely cared about family. Rose came to the door and told Clark and Iris that they needed to leave and that they were disturbing our neighbors, and Clark turned to her and said that she needed to mind her own business, and that this was between family members. Rose said that I was her family now, and she wouldn't let them harass me in my own home, and would call the police if they didn't leave immediately. Iris grabbed Clark's arm and tried to pull him away from the door and said they should go, but Clark shook her off and kept yelling at me. Clark said that our parents had sacrificed everything for us, that the restaurant was struggling because he had made some poor decisions, but that we could save it if we all worked together, and that I was being selfish by not helping when I clearly had money to spare. I told him that his gambling problem was not my responsibility, and I wouldn't bail out a business that had never been meant for me anyway, and that our parents had made it clear the restaurant was his inheritance, not mine. Clark said I was lying, and our parents had always planned for both of us to work together, and that I had ruined everything by leaving for college. The argument grew louder, and Clark was standing in my doorway and refused to move, and Iris was trying to calm him down, but he continued yelling about how I had abandoned the family, and how our parents were suffering due to my selfishness. I told him that our parents were suffering because they had raised a son who stole money from their business to cover gambling debts, and that maybe they should focus on getting him help instead of trying to pull me back into their drama. Clark grew even angrier and said that his gambling wasn't so bad, and that he had just made some mistakes, and that the real problem was that I had left and broken our parents' hearts. Rose stepped between us and told Clark that he needed to leave immediately, and that she was going to call the police, and Clark said he wasn't scared of the police, and that he had every right to talk to his brother. I told him that I was no longer his brother. Clark began crying and saying that he never wanted our parents to disown me, and that he had tried to persuade them to let me return, but they had been too stubborn and proud to acknowledge their mistake. I told him that he had never tried to help me, and that he had posted on social media about his gratitude for his true family, and that he had enjoyed being the sole son for the past 8 years, so he shouldn't act like he cared about me now. Clark said those posts weren't directed at me, and that he had just been trying to comfort our parents after I left, and that he had always hoped I would return someday. Iris finally succeeded in pulling him away from the door and said they were leaving and that perhaps we could all talk when everyone was calmer. Clark kept yelling as Iris pulled him down the driveway, claiming I would regret this, that families were meant to forgive each other, and that I was making a big mistake by not giving our parents another chance. I closed the door and locked it, and Rose hugged me, saying she was proud of me for defending myself and not letting them pressure me into something I didn't want to do. We could hear Clark shouting in the street for a few more minutes before Iris managed to get him into their car, and they drove away. Update 2. The next morning, I woke up to numerous notifications on my phone and noticed that several friends had tagged me in social media comments. I checked Clark's profile and saw that he had posted a lengthy rant about our dispute the night before, and Iris had posted a video she had evidently filmed on her phone during our argument. The video showed Clark standing at my door. He could be heard yelling about family and pleading with me to help our parents, and then it showed me closing the door on him, and Rose could be heard telling them to leave. Clark had written a post stating he had attempted to contact his estranged brother to help mend their family, and that I had been harsh and unfeeling, refusing to even hear him discuss our suffering parents who needed assistance. He said that I had grown cold and self-centered since acquiring money, that I had forgotten my roots, and that I was prioritizing my pride over my family. The post had dozens of comments from people who didn't know the whole story, saying I was wrong and that I should forgive my parents and help them in their time of need. Iris had posted the video with a caption about how heartbreaking it was to watch a family be torn apart, and how she couldn't understand how someone could turn their back on their parents, who just wanted to reconcile and make things right. The video made it look like Clark was just trying to have a calm conversation, and that I was being unreasonable by not letting him in, and by threatening to call the police. You couldn't really hear everything that was being said because the video was taken from outside, and the sound quality wasn't very good, but it definitely made me look bad. I was really angry that they had recorded our private conversation without telling me, and that they were trying to make me look like the bad guy when they were the ones who had shown up at my house uninvited and refused to leave when I asked them to. Rose was furious and said that Iris had no right to record us and post it online without our permission, and that we should report the video for violating our privacy. I didn't want to get into a big social media drama, but I was upset that people who didn't know anything about the situation were judging me based on a video that didn't show the whole story. My friend Sam, whom I had known since college, saw the post and video and commented asking Clark why he didn't mention that our parents had disowned me 8 years ago and thrown me out of the house when I wanted to go to college. Sam pointed out that it was convenient Clark was omitting the part about how our parents had blocked my phone number and refused to see me for almost a decade, and that now they only wanted me back because their business was failing and they believed I could help them financially. More of my friends began commenting and sharing their own stories about family members who had cut them off and then tried to return when they needed something, and they all affirmed that I was doing the right thing by setting boundaries and not letting my parents back into my life simply because they wanted something from me. The comment section devolved into a major argument between my friends, who were defending me, and people who knew Clark and Iris, who were saying that family should always forgive each other, and that I was being petty and vindictive. Clark began responding to the comments and getting into arguments with my friends, and he kept asserting that they didn't understand the situation and that I was lying about what had truly happened 8 years ago. He claimed that our parents had never truly disowned me, and that I had simply left on my own and refused to return home. Clark became increasingly defensive as more people called him out, and he started deleting comments and blocking those who disagreed with him. Iris stopped responding to comments after my friends began pointing out that she had been married to Clark for less than 2 years and knew nothing about what had happened when I was in high school. The post began being shared by more people, and the comments section turned into a chaotic mess of arguments between those who supported me and those who thought I should forgive my family. By the afternoon, Clark had removed the entire post and the video because too many people were calling him out and highlighting the inconsistencies in his story, and he was feeling embarrassed by all the negative attention. He sent me a private message saying that he hadn't intended for things to get so out of hand and that he just wanted to help our parents, but that he apologized for posting about our argument online. I did not reply to his message because I didn't want to encourage him to continue trying to contact me, and I remained angry that he had tried to portray me negatively on social media in the first place. Update 3. 2 days after Clark removed his social media post, my mom called my work number and somehow got transferred to my direct line, even though I had never provided my work information to any of my family members. I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone rang. My mom started crying as soon as I said hello and said that she had gotten my work number from the company website and that she was sorry for bothering me, but she needed to talk to me about what had happened with Clark's social media posts. She said that she and my dad had no idea Clark was going to post about our argument online, and that they were embarrassed and upset that he had tried to make me look bad when they were the ones who had made mistakes in the past. My mom said that Clark had told them about his post after my friends started commenting, and that my dad had been angry with Clark for making the situation worse and for trying to manipulate people on social media. She said that they had told Clark and Iris not to contact me anymore, and that they wanted to apologize for sending them to my house in the first place. I told my mom that I was at work and couldn't have personal conversations during business hours, and that she needed to stop calling me and leave me alone. My mom said that she understood I was angry, but that she just wanted me to know that they weren't trying to manipulate me or use me for money, and that they genuinely wanted to have a relationship with me again because they missed me and regretted what they had done. She mentioned they had been consulting a counselor about the matter and that they realized they had made terrible mistakes, wanting to set things right even if it took years to rebuild our relationship. I informed her that I had no interest in rebuilding our relationship, having moved on with my life and no longer needing them, and that they had forfeited the right to be my parents when they threw me out. My mom began crying harder, stating that she knew they deserved my anger, but hoped someday I would be willing to forgive them and give them a chance to prove they had changed. She explained they weren't asking for money or assistance with the restaurant. They simply wished to be part of my life again and get to know the person I had become. I informed her that if she truly wished to prove she had changed, she would respect my wishes and cease contacting me, adding that calling my work number was inappropriate and could get me in trouble with my boss. My mom apologized for calling me at work, explaining she didn't know how else to reach me since I had blocked their phone numbers, and that she was desperate to mend things between us. I told her that I had blocked their numbers for a reason, that I did not wish to be contacted by any of them, and that if they kept trying to reach me, I would file for a restraining order. My mom fell silent for a moment and then said that she didn't wish for things to reach that stage, and that she would tell my dad and Clark that they had to leave me be and not attempt to reach out to me again. I informed her that I was earnest about the restraining order, and that I had already lodged a police report when they appeared at my home, and that I had evidence of their persistent bothering, and that a judge would certainly approve the order if I requested it. My mom said she comprehended, and that she would ensure everyone in the family understood not to reach out to me, and that they would respect my decision, even though it was heartbreaking for them. I told her that I needed to return to my job, and that this would be the final time I would take a call from any of them, and that if they attempted to reach me once more, I would promptly seek the restraining order and have them apprehended for breaching it. My mom said she understood, and that she loved me, and that she would always love me, even if she never saw me again, and then she ended the call. I trembled after the call because I hadn't heard my mother's serene and affectionate voice in 8 years, and it recalled many memories. I spoke with my boss after the meeting and clarified that I was experiencing some family difficulties, and that someone might attempt to call me at work again, and I would appreciate it if my calls could be filtered, with only work-related calls being directed to my personal line. My boss mentioned that HR could assist me in setting up call screening and that I should inform them if anyone appeared at the office attempting to see me. I also conversed with building security, providing them with pictures of my parents and Clark and Iris, and instructed them not to permit any of them into the building if they arrived. I chose to be proactive and visited the courthouse the following day to obtain information about applying for a restraining order, ensuring I would be ready if my family attempted to reach me again. The clerk provided me with all the necessary documents and clarified the procedure, stating that based on what I had shared about them appearing at my house, refusing to depart, and subsequently calling my work, I would likely be eligible for a temporary restraining order. She explained that the temporary order would be issued at once, followed by a hearing where a judge would determine whether to make it permanent. I completed all the documents but had not yet submitted them, as I wished to grant my family one final opportunity to leave me undisturbed, as my mom had pledged. I texted my mom using an unfamiliar number and told her I had been to the courthouse and filled out restraining order paperwork, ready to be filed, and that if anyone in the family contacted me again, I would file it immediately. I told her this was her last warning and that I was serious about protecting myself from their harassment. My mom texted back within an hour, saying she had talked to my dad and Clark and Iris, and that they all understood and promised never to contact me again, and that they would tell any other family members or friends not to reach out to me either. She said that they would respect my wishes and leave me alone, even though it was painful for them, and that they hoped someday in the future I might change my mind, but that they wouldn't pressure me or try to force a relationship. She stated she was proud of the person I might change my mind, but that they wouldn't pressure me or try to force a relationship. She said that she was proud of the person I had become, and that she was sorry for all the pain they had caused me. I didn't respond to her text message because I didn't want to encourage any more communication, but I felt relieved that they finally seemed to understand that I was serious about not wanting them in my life. It's been 3 weeks since my mom called my work, and none of them have tried to contact me since then, and I haven't seen any social media posts about me or the situation. I still possess the restraining order paperwork, prepared for filing just in case, but it appears they've finally grasped the message that I'm not going to change my mind and that there will be legal repercussions if they don't leave me alone. Rose and I have been discussing possibly moving to another city in a year or two, just to get a fresh start and ensure my family can't find us. But for now, things seem to have calmed down, and I'm hoping they will continue to respect my boundaries and leave me alone, as they promised.